Welcome back to the Bourbon and BS podcast, everyone. This is episode 117. This is the first time I think we've actually done kind of a collaboration with a podcast in another state. So we are lucky enough. You see Nate on here this week in the top right corner if you're watching. And we have Alaina and Abby, otherwise known as Bourbon and Blondes. Welcome, ladies.
Thanks.
Hi. Thanks for having us.
It's our pleasure entirely. Yes, it's great to have you guys on. Before we get started, I do want to thank our sponsors. So first, patreon.com/Bourbon and BS podcast. We have some great patrons that are helping us support this. It helps out with the StreamYard. It helps out with loading the podcast audio and everything like that. It helps with everything that goes into this every week, and we appreciate that support. So if you guys want to go on there, you can contribute. We just got a new patron tonight right before we went on live, so I appreciate that. And also Tinderbox at Easton, Columbus, Ohio. They are supplying our featured cigar tonight, which is the Sobremesa. We also had help from, I want to give a shout out to Grand Cru in St. Louis. I spoke with them, and that's who hooked the ladies up with the Sobremesa. So appreciate that. But with Tinderbox at Easton, I do want to throw out this week, they have a what we're calling a stay-at-home sampler. And if you guys are interested, you can email eastontinderbox@gmail.com. And this sampler here from La Aurora and Miami Cigars, you get 5 cigars, and it is 30% off. So we're trying to, with Tinderbox, trying to help everyone that's staying at home. They are now doing carry out as far as the curbside pickup as well as shipping. So if you guys are interested, eastontinderbox@gmail.com. This one retails for over $50. It is $35 plus tax and shipping. So check that out and check Tinderbox at Easton out. Also, Altadis USA behind me. You've got Romeo Julieta, you got Monte Cristo, H. Upman. They've got several other lines. And Nate, I know you've got the second cigar that they offer and support us with, which is the H. Upman Hispaniola. Fantastic newer cigar. That's going to be Jose Mendez behind that one for H. Upman. So I'm looking forward to smoking that in the second half, as well as the BS Cigar Company, another sponsor. We appreciate having on my sweatshirt there, as well as I got a gold, I got a silver. But check them out, bscigarcompany@gmail.com if you guys are interested, or communicate with us through the podcast, and we'll hook you guys up with where you need to go. Am I missing anything, Nate?
Nope.
Cool. So, ladies, these guys, everyone that listens, hears me every week. Let's hear a little bit before we get into the whiskey and cigars. Let's hear about the Bourbon and Blondes podcast. What's that?
I said Alaina can tell.
Already passed.
Yeah.
All right.
I was going to say if me and Abby will just end up talking over each other. So,
I can mute you guys, so that's fine.
You may need to about an hour in and a few drinks in. Somebody may need to be muted
when the bottle gets to about there.
Right.
So a little bit of background on the podcast. So me and Abby met last year. We met at a salsa club of all places. It was a mutual friend. It was a friend's birthday of mine, and we kind of danced all night, and then hung out the next week. And then a few weeks after that, we were at a bar in St. Louis called Brennan's. Awesome cigar and whiskey bourbon bar.
Yeah.
And she's like, we should start a podcast. We were just BSing and just talking and normal.
I had been overserved at this point.
Typically when the good ideas come out.
I'm getting very overserved at my own house recently. So
bartender's got a heavy hand.
Yeah. So she said, we should have a podcast. We should do a podcast. We should call it Bourbon and Blondes. So I immediately looked up and went to see if the domain was available, and it's kind of, I don't know. From there, we built the website. Yeah. So the concept was kind of just like texting back and forth. We're like, why don't we kind of have some type of female empowerment? We felt like there wasn't a ton of women there's a lot of women in the industry, but not a lot of our friends, women friends, liked bourbon or knew about bourbon, or not that they didn't like it, but had an interest in it, but it was an intimidating conversation. So we kind of targeted that, and then add a little bit of like, I don't know, entrepreneurial spirit and a little bit of personal growth aspect to the podcast and what we talk about. So we feature word of the episode is our jam. Every single episode has a word associated with it, and we kind of try to tie it into the bourbon that we're drinking on the episode.
Like it.
It's always chaos.
You guys been doing it for just over a year, right?
Yeah,
almost a year.
Almost
So we
a year.
came up with the idea last March, but we didn't publish our first episodes until July.
Okay.
So it took us a while to kind of get our shit together.
Well, you're on season 2. I know that. So
Yes.
that's why. Okay.
Yeah,
Season 2.
Yeah.
We abbreviated season 1 a little.
We kind of did. I realized that I was just like, episode whatever of season 1. I finally just started doing season 2 for some organizational purposes, but I don't know. It is what it is, right? But that's fantastic.
Yeah,
That's
it's
fantastic.
crazy.
we fly blind, so you just kind of discover it as you go.
Yeah, no, that's how doing a podcast works, apparently. So we figured that out over the last couple years as well. I mean, I go back every once in a while and listen to the earlier episodes, and my God, it's changed quite a bit, especially more recently with doing this format and having on everyone remote and everything else. So things changed. I mean, definitely. So that's really cool, though. I've listened to several episodes. Nate, I know you listened to a few lately as well.
Yeah, I listened to the most recent 2, the one they did with Pensacola Pope down in Willett.
Yeah, the Pope.
He's the best.
That sounds like a very awesome job and place to hang out at.
Right.
Especially here. Yeah, he makes ice. He cuts ice with a chainsaw. But no, also the fact because here in Ohio we can't get Willett. Anything from Willett, we can't get it here in Ohio.
Oh,
so yeah, so Steve and I know I have a bottle of pot still. Steve may have killed his already.
They don't last. Turns out. It turns out they do not last in my house.
There's a big hole in the bottom. Yeah.
Can you guys get like Noah's Mill or any of like the Willett umbrella products? Just nothing out of that.
Nothing. They don't distribute to Ohio at this time.
Yep.
Dang.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, Ohio's a state-run liquor agency. And I don't know what Missouri is, but with Ohio, things are a little bit different. And it's changed a lot over the last several years. I think they're doing a lot of good things. There's some positives we talked about on the podcast in the past as far as pricing. There's standard pricing across the board, which is nice most of the time. It helps with that, with going from location to location. If something's hard to find, they started doing lotteries for smaller allocations. So they're making waves. But yeah, there's a lot of Ohioans that are very disappointed that it's not that far to go somewhere else. Like if you're in Columbus, you can go to another state, no problem, in about 2.5, 3 hours, even though you're not supposed to bring them across state lines. But that's just one of those favorites that it's hard to get here in Ohio. But we love Willett products, absolutely. Willett Rye, when it was the 3-year rye, was definitely it's still one of my top ones. I have 2 bottles of that in the house, and I'm afraid to crack them. So
you have to get down to Bardstown. The bar there, you got to make. I highly recommend making a reservation ahead of time. But the food is phenomenal. The bar, the bar Willett. So they opened it in September of last year, and I happened to be down there in September, and I think it was the 2nd or 3rd day they were open. And so you didn't have to make a reservation or anything at the time. We just went upstairs and ended up talking to Andy for a few hours. And I told Andy, I was like, we're coming back. And so me and Abby came back, back in February. And he's so passionate. I mean, both the guys behind the bar are just so passionate about the industry and cocktail making and the process. And it's literally some of the most, it's one of the best cocktails I've ever had, but some of the most creative experience because they stamp with the Willett logo, the ice with a copper stamp. And I mean, we talked about it and he takes a cutout of the W and he'll spray bitters on top of some of the, certain cocktails. Yeah. And it's so creative. I love it.
Very cool experience. That's awesome. Yeah. I went down to Willett, but it's been more than that. They had the construction on the bar. So the gift shop was open, but the bar wasn't yet up top there. So haven't had a chance. So I need to get back down there for sure. Do it. I'm going to. Yeah. Cause again, traveling is so easy right now. Absolutely.
Well, right. You might have to wait a little, but
yeah. It's on the books. We'll get there. So let's dive into the old Ezra. You guys, when you're on your podcast, I feel like it's nice, organic as far as conversation goes. But if you don't mind, walk us through how you guys dive into a bottle. So anyone that hasn't heard the Bourbon and Blondes podcast, kind of get a little sneak peek on how you guys crack the bottle, pour the glass, all that good stuff. If you don't mind, I'm gonna put you on the spot.
Do it. Bring it on.
Done.
We cannonball more than we dive into it, but
I love it.
No, we don't. You test the water and you make sure the chlorine balance is right. Alaina is the researcher. So all of the information we share about the bourbon typically comes from Alaina and everything she's read and looked at. And then I just sit down and we start recording and it's all there and we're done. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we all have our roles.
Yeah, exactly. And mine is not to be prepared.
Perfect.
But I think our choices and our selection is just we're starting with the simple stuff, right? So we've only been doing it about a year. We're okay, this is the beginning of our journey in bourbon. So let's figure out what we like, the basic stuff like mellow corn versus Buffalo Trace. Where are we on the scale? I don't think there's a rhyme or reason to what we choose. It's just what we happen to pick from the store.
That's kind of like us.
Yeah.
That's kind of like us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's significance. Most of the time, it's just what's available. What haven't we done? The more episodes we do, the harder it is to find stuff without going into really high dollar stuff, really rare stuff, things like that. But there's always new stuff out there.
Yeah, it's just this crazy market. Everything just keeps popping up.
That's right. So let's dive in. Old Ezra 7. Walk us through it. What do you guys know about it? What do you guys think about it? I've never had this. I cracked it. I've already poured it. Now tonight I poured it in. Not only a typical rocks glass, but then also a Glencairn, just because I wanted to see if it tastes any different. I do not have any rocks or anything like that. What do you guys? You're all neat.
I got a snifter.
You got a Willet glass down there. I see that.
Yeah, I've got a Denver and Liley whiskey glass.
Nice.
It's supposed to make it smell and taste better. I don't know.
Yeah. Does it? You have no frame of reference.
I mean, you definitely
have 2 glasses.
I will say I think we lost Abby for a second. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. No problem.
Perfect. Yeah, I honestly, when I was doing a little bit of research ahead of time, when you think of 117 proof, you usually think of kind of a kick in the teeth, but this is damn good for it, smooth in my opinion, for especially a barrel proof. But I saw that it was 78% corn and 12% malted barley and 10% rye. I don't know Abby, if you want to on the
trying to experience right now because I haven't tasted this ever. Yeah, I think it's vanilla caramel. Smells a little sweet, probably high corn.
Definitely high corn, like it says. Yeah.
I get a little smokiness, but I can't tell if that's this or just the flavor of the cigar. Mixed in.
And it'll be different. You guys don't normally smoke cigars, obviously, while you guys are doing your podcast or typically sipping on whiskeys. I'm getting.
Well, when I have a cigar, I just smoke or I drink whiskey. So hand
in hand. But I'm getting a little bit, and maybe it is the heat right off the rip here. But I'm getting a little bit of cinnamon almost. But I do get a little bit of sweetness as well.
Yeah, I get kind of spicy oak, some of the spices, like you said, cinnamon, and it's got in my opinion, a very, very smooth and decently long finish as well.
I think it's a very long finish.
It is. I like the mouthfeel of it. It just kind of the heat just rests, and it's amazing.
Yeah, Nate, what do you think?
Well, I think it's got a thickness to it, a viscosity to it, and that's kind of one of the reasons why that spice that you get in it just kind of coats your palate and and causes that finish to last so long. It's very oily. It's got legs for days on the glass.
It really does.
And it's got an extremely dark color to it, almost like a caramel, or even a little bit darker, almost like someone overcooked their batch of caramel.
It's pretty dark. I mean, it's not. I mean, the light obviously it's pretty dark.
Yeah, and it's 7 years, so it's you definitely get some of that char, some of that toasted oak from being a barrel proof. They don't hide that at all. But no, even though at 117, it's still a very enjoyable whiskey, which, a lot of times we talk about, sometimes that gets you in trouble. 117 proof and it drinks this smooth. It's going to be a long night. Or short night, depending on how heavy your pours are.
Typically, it's a long night when you're in the garage, but yeah, absolutely.
I chose the garage, didn't you?
I'm always in the garage. This is like a bonus room, basically, in the house. This is our studio as well.
That's awesome.
I could see this going well in a Manhattan. I mean, I would definitely drink it neat, personally, but I could see it being very delicious in a cocktail, especially like a smoked Manhattan,
old fashioned.
Yeah.
I just made a smoked simple syrup that this would pair really well with.
You made it?
Mm-hmm.
That's creative.
Yeah, so you make the simple syrup on like the stove, and then when you're done cooking whatever meat or smoking whatever meat on a charcoal grill, you just stick the pot on there for a little while, and it infuses it with some smoke. Oh my gosh, it's delicious.
Did you come up with this, or did you read about this?
So my friends did it first, and I copied them, but I'm gonna own it right now.
Sure. You could have left out the first part, and you would have been fine.
Well, I mean, I got to be honest a little.
Absolutely. So what I know about Old Ezra, the 7-year, this has only been out for 2-3 years, I think it was. I think 2017, 18. And as Nate mentioned, I think before we went on the air, it is through Luxro, excuse me. And they have their name on there. It's a company that we talk about on the podcast. One of Nate's and my kind of favorite, almost sleepers, I feel like, at least in Ohio, is that David Nicholson, which was $39.99. Then it dropped down to $35. I was at the store, Nate. I don't know if you saw it in Ohio. It's back up to $39 now. So that didn't last. We think that's the next like, Henry McKenna as far as something that's going to go up in price. It's going to be something big. But yeah, so they do that, and they do source it. So they have for those of you that don't know about Luxro, they have started their own distillery, so they're starting to do their own juice. But this is not said juice. And I don't know if you guys have you know about it, or if you know anyone in the industry, but everything that I read, it pointed to Heaven Hill as far as sourcing. But then a lot of other ones said that they don't really disclose it. It's just assumed or whatever that they're utilizing Heaven Hill right now.
Yeah, that's actually, I was trying to dig in, and that's what I got as well, was that I saw Heaven Hill's name on it, but not in some people's review of it.
Right.
I read a little bit that they had a 101 proof, I think, Old Ezra, they had, they said something like along the lines that they were trying to do something similar to what they did with Rebel Yellow, and to do a barrel strength to kind of get more attention to the product. Yeah. So I don't know how true that is, but I found that
the Rebel Yell 10 I've always liked from them. So this being, what was that?
I said that one's good. I like the Rebel Yell 10.
Yeah. But I don't know, Nate, what are you thinking of this? I mean, do you like it? Do you not like it? Was it 40? Is 40 or 49?
It's $49.99 in the state of Ohio.
49 in Ohio, yeah.
So where you guys are prices controlled by the state, or is it just every shop for itself?
It's
I think the market usually dictates it.
Okay. So that's one of the good things. Some people complain about it here in Ohio, but sometimes it has its benefits. Like if you're going to a store to get a bottle of whiskey, it doesn't matter what store in the entire state of Ohio you go to, it's going to be the same price everywhere. So you don't have the price gouging of some whiskeys. So like Blanton's here in Ohio is $55. No matter where you go,
wow.
It's $55. What I assume you guys are seeing it for over 100.
Yeah.
Okay.
It depends on where you go.
And honestly, I mean, we couldn't find the Old Ezra, like our totals, some of the smaller outlets, they didn't have it available. So we actually
it's not readily available around here. You have to luck out a little bit, at least in the Columbus area.
There's only half a dozen liquor agencies in Columbus that have it.
And then there's the store by me that has been saying it has it, because we have a website for the state called OHLQ. And the one right down the street from me, since Sunday, I've been in there twice and asked different employees, and it says they have full stock of it, and it's not anywhere to be found. So either they're messing with people, they're holding on to it for people, or I just really can't find it. But
it could have been allocated.
Yeah, I can't find it anywhere. And I even asked the guy, and yeah, he looked.
I found it this morning.
Yeah, right.
Nice.
Probably.
No, I did.
Oh, that's right. You did find it this morning.
I did get it this morning.
This one did get an award. I think this is one of the reasons why it's on the map. If you guys saw that, Whiskey Advocate, which is a big publication, which is, I believe, the same owner of Cigar Aficionado. And that's a big publication for the cigar industry. But Whiskey Advocate put this at, believe it or not, the age 7 years. They put it at number 7 for the 2019 list. And so I know that a lot of people, it popped up on a lot of radars that people weren't looking at this because it wasn't readily available. But, when you get praises like that, top 25, and even if it is sourced, doesn't matter, whatever it is. I mean, they're doing a lot of good things. And I got to be honest, I think this is a very good barrel strength. It's not too strong. What is it, 117?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to say light, but it's kind of light for a barrel strength. If you're not over 120, I feel like, it's kind of, you're flirting with that a little bit. Because I've seen, what was it, 1920 Old Foresters 115, and I don't think they call that barrel strength, if I'm not mistaken.
Right. Yeah. I would drink this every day. It's a very easy to drink barrel strength. So if you want to get into the barrel strength conversation, this would be a great place to start because it's not going to knock you in the teeth. It's very smooth. It's got a lot of flavor. So even if you want to start with barrel strength and you dump an ice cube in there, you're going to open up the flavor notes a little bit more so you can really start getting what's in here.
Yeah, I'm getting even more of that cinnamon and everything from the Glencairn glass, honestly.
Yeah. Really?
Yeah. It's like concentrating a little bit. And maybe it's just because the rocks glass has been kind of breathing a little bit more. I'm not quite sure, but I know that's kind of it. We do have just kind of bring in some people. So Dustin had a comment here. I know he's drinking it tonight. He says toasted toffee, praline pecan. That's what I get from it. Very specific, Dustin. Very specific.
Some fancy nuts right there.
That is quite the palate.
Sounds like dessert.
Hands down amazing. So he's a big fan of it. And then we've got someone else here who was Kevin, who's watching on YouTube, which is fantastic. Kevin, welcome. Wasn't really impressed with the Ezra 7. Some of the picks I've had are better. It's interesting because when you're drinking and you're trying so many different whiskeys. I mean, you guys do a podcast. We do a podcast. There's a lot of enthusiasts out there. We're talking about hobbies and lifestyles. I think the conversation might go a little later that, whiskey and bourbon it's starting to flirt between hobby and lifestyle for a lot of people. So Kevin, I'm not familiar with what you've had before, but the more you drink different bottles, it's really hard not to compare it. It really is because, you try to go in there, as objectively as possible, but it's really hard not to be subjective when you have favorites. You have favorites like even the same company will make, all of that good stuff. He says barrel picks. So also Dean sounds like he was commenting on what you were talking about with your smoked simple syrup. This is kind of cool. You see this is a really nice steakhouse here. He's in Portland. That places a pan of water in their smoker. Ooh. Then they freeze it and make smoked whiskey drinks with the smoked ice. So that's something else you can try, Abby.
Yeah. I'm not patient enough to freeze water usually, but I might give it a shot. I think the Kevin who's commenting, he's our friend who provided the whiskey for us tonight.
Yes.
Oh, so you guys are familiar with Kevin.
His collection is out of this world.
Really?
It's insane. He has more whiskey and bourbon than I've ever seen in my life. And there's a couple of friends here. He has a bourbon podcast too. It's Beer Bourbon Barbecue or something. Nice. I'm gonna butcher it. I'm sorry, Kevin. But yeah,
he can share it on the feed if he'd like.
Yeah, he can. I get what he's saying. He does a lot of he tries to find store picks and single barrel picks and stuff. So barrel strength is usually better in those, but I think this is just an easy daily barrel strength.
Well, I think you're coming in. So Kevin, if you're still watching on YouTube, let us know what picks, if you're referring to Ezra picks or just other picks in general, because again, that opens it up. The more, if you've got a wide, expansive collection, and we'll do this towards the end of part 1 here. But when you look at it, we'll do kind of a 1 out of 10 rating. And it's something that I always look at price. I look at what it is, and try to be as subjective as possible, because you throw it up against some of your favorites. You're going to have a lot of not winners, if you will, because you're always going to go back to your favorites. Cigars are the same way, and Nate knows a lot about that as well. Is that cigars? You have a new cigar, it comes in at say $12 or whatever, or $10 or $15, and you're immediately matching it up against other cigars that you like. So we get that a lot. Me being on the retail side of the cigar business, you give them a new, hey, what's new? You give them something just like bourbon. You give Old Ezra 7. You had it? No, I haven't had it. All right, it's $50. And right away, even before you crack it, you're thinking about what else you've had. You're thinking about, all right, $50. What are my favorites at $50? And then as soon as you take a sip of it, you're like, I like this one better. And it's tough not to do that. I'm not saying, obviously, and he says Ezra picks. So, I mean, he sounds like he's extremely knowledgeable, but I know I fall into that sometimes. It's really hard not to compare it to some of your favorites. And
you have to be a little objective when you're doing things like this, especially because, people are watching and listening. And it's like, okay, we've definitely had better whiskey. But when it comes to just like a standard product from a distillery, this is, in my opinion, it's pretty good. It's easy to drink. It's got a lot of flavor. So,
well, again, at that 117, I mean, it's tough in my opinion, it's tough to find those in the middle 110s that are going to be really smooth, because I feel like sometimes they do come across hotter than you'd imagine. And there's some in the 120s that come across a lot smoother. But I did add a little bit of water to the Glencairn, and just doing that, it definitely takes away some of that cinnamon. It takes away some of the like kind of spice and everything else as it naturally would. But it also makes me believe I definitely would tend to agree with you guys about this being in a cocktail, because, it does kind of mellow it out. So if you add some of that simple syrup, you add some of those, like a cherry or something in there, I think you'd definitely have a winner. Do you guys do a lot of cocktails with higher end whiskeys? Because that used to be, you don't want to mix a good bourbon or a good rye, right? That was the trend for, I feel like, a long time. That was the agreed upon thing. Like, oh, you ruin it. If you put an ice cube in it, you're ruining it. And now I'm seeing a lot more of these designer cocktails. We've had some bartenders on the show, and I know you guys have interviewed some. It's like now they're using some, maybe not like super, super old stuff, but they're using some barrel strength. They're using some age on these things, and they're putting them in cocktails that are absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah, I've been exploring during this quarantine cocktail making a lot because we haven't been able to go out to the bar. So I know personally for me, I really like a strong drink, and everyone's so different in what they like. And I've been gravitating towards things that are above 90 proof, or like right here, I've got like the old granddad. I'll put that, it's 100 proof. I'll put that in a cocktail any day. Anything bonded. Put that in a Manhattan or Sazerac or old fashioned. So I think I prefer, I agree. I also do this thing where if the bottle is over a certain amount, I don't know if I can justify putting it into a cocktail if I really enjoy it by itself.
And you're talking cost.
Yeah. Like if I buy a $125 bottle and I think it tastes absolutely amazing by itself, I have a really hard time putting it into a cocktail because it tastes so good standalone.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think I'm 50-50 on it. If I have an expensive bottle, I'm always going to try it in a cocktail, or I'm going to go to a bar and try it in a cocktail and see if I like it. Because sometimes it just opens up the flavor so much more depending on what you mix with it. If it's a really well-made cocktail, not like a whiskey ginger or whatever, there are things, you just get a totally different taste experience. So I may not buy a bottle of Pappy and mix it in cocktails for the whole bottle. I might split it 50-50. I don't know, but I think you get more out of it sometimes, and you can experience more flavors if you make a great cocktail.
Well, I think, too, it depends on the cocktail, right? I mean, like, whiskey sour or something like that. I have not had many that have had a high-end whiskey, but, I mean, it's one of those things. I think some of the classics, like Old Fashioned, the Manhattan we mentioned, and obviously there's so many different new designer, if you will, cocktails out there. I mean, that's the trend. I mean, the bartender is definitely taking more of, I think, that hold on not just cracking beers, not just pouring out of a bottle. I mean, there's a lot of art that's going into it, a lot of creativity. And, I think that those are the cocktails that you might want to flirt with a little bit as far as what you're putting in there. Now, I agree with you, Alaina, that if I've got a bottle that was like $80, $90, $100 or something like that, or super rare, I'm not going to put it in a cocktail. That's just me, but I'm sure there are a lot of people out there that would. This is one, though, even at $50, I would definitely order maybe a drink at a bar that, that they would recommend, hey, have you had it with this in there? And sure, it's going to be a few dollars more to have that, but I would definitely get behind that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's the beauty of whenever we can go out again and leave the house. I think that's the beauty of going to places, especially that have an extensive bourbon collection, that you can just try, the 2-ounce pours or whatever. Mm-hmm. And just, that's how I oftentimes end up. I don't usually go out and seek an $80 or $90 bottle unless I know I really either I like the brand and I've never tried it, or I've tried it, when we've gone out before. I think it's always, I'll pay $10 for a pour, $12, $15 for a pour if I can end up going to buy the bottle.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Nate, what about you? Cocktails? You a cocktail guy? You've been quiet here. What do we?
Not typically. Typically, I'm straight up neat. Yeah. Not even an ice cube. Typically, when I do mine, if I do taste something that I think is a little too hot on the palate, like anything that might be hotter than this Ezra right here, then I might add a splash of water to it. But typically, I just enjoy it for what it is and pour it in a glass and drink it straight up.
I think it's easier that way. If I'm drinking at home, I typically don't do cocktails.
The only time I do a cocktail is on my birthday. That's it. When I go out for my birthday, that's the only time I do a cocktail.
What's the cocktail then?
Yeah.
Well, typically I do an old fashioned at one of the steakhouses right behind the Tinderbox. It's funny. Last year for my birthday, they had a drink on their menu that came out of one of their restaurants in New York, and it won some huge, cocktail of the year, whatever award. And I think it was a Manhattan with a rye, a really good rye that I enjoy. And so I asked my server, I wanted to order that. And he's like, what do you normally like to drink? I'm like, well, I like bourbon and rye. He's like, yeah, then you won't like that. I'm like, really? And he's like, everyone that I've sold that to that likes rye, they can't taste the rye, so they don't end up liking the drink. Yeah. I was like, oh, so I was like, okay, well then I'll take an old fashioned. Then he ended up bringing me both. He brought me the one I had ordered, and then the one I had wanted to order. Comped me the one I had wanted to order, and then the restaurant
right there.
Well, the restaurant comped me the other drink because the hostess bumped my table and spilled my glass all over me. So I got free drinks that night.
Did you fill out a Yelp review or at least a comment card or something?
I did fill out a comment card, but it was all good things.
I would hope so. You got a bunch of free drinks.
I got 2. But the guy was right. I didn't like the one that I was going to order, even though it was this drink that won an award and had a really enjoyable rye. I didn't like it. My wife liked it, and the one I liked, she didn't like. So it was a nice balance. I got one I liked, she got one she liked. So
there you go. There you go.
That's the best partnership, when you don't like food or alcoholic beverages that the other one likes.
That's absolutely right. All right, so what do you guys think of this cigar? So on its own, typically we're going to do on its own, and then we'll talk about the pairing.
Okay.
So we're smoking the Sobremesa. This is from Dunbarton Tobacco and Trust. This is done by a gentleman that was with a company for a long period of time, Drew Estate, and he was behind some major projects when he was in the operations and everything. And then he rose within the company and was leading a big chunk of that company before he left a few years back. Now it's a handful of years now, but so he branched out on his own, and he's a great guy. He's very knowledgeable. He's had a lot of success with different blends. And then when he started his own company, he didn't buy any factories. He didn't, buy as far as like any fields or anything like that. But he's not just sourcing it like a lot of people will do in the industry. He is buying tobacco. He is basically like shipping it to the factory. He uses Hoya de Nicaragua primarily, which is a company that he got to know as he was with Drew Estate, because they do a lot of stuff and they distribute for that company. And the Sobremesa was one of his earlier releases. And this cigar is something that I know Nate likes. I know I like. It's a shop favorite. It is a very popular cigar. So we'll start with you, Alaina and Abby. What do you guys think of this? I mean, you guys said you smoke cigars. Not necessarily all the time, not necessarily regularly, but not necessarily like one a year. I mean, you guys are occasional smokers. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say that's accurate.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I think it's so. I don't know much about what goes into the cigar, but
Tobacco.
I mean, yeah, fair enough.
That's it.
But I mean, I think it's like an easy smoke. It's great with that mixes with the bourbon, and yeah, I don't know. It tastes good to me. I'll keep
Tastes good to
smoking
you.
it.
Abby?
You know, I don't hate it.
That's
I don't really know how to.
If you started a Yelp review like that, going back to that, it was
Okay, I don't do
it's not a
reviews
5 out of 5,
online.
that's for sure. You what?
That's not my vibe. I don't do online reviews. I don't write them. I don't read them.
Fair.
That's not my vibe. No, I think this is great. It's my test of cigars is, do I think I can smoke the whole thing? Because a lot of them are very big. They're full bodied.
Sure.
That is sometimes too much for me, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
The smell of it when I pulled it out of the bag from the shop was phenomenal. I like the taste of it. I don't know how to articulate things. I don't know if I'm supposed to be tasting something specific.
No, I think that's fine.
I taste hints of tobacco.
Yes, burning tobacco. You're spot on. You're absolutely spot on. So this cigar, it does have we'll go through it. It's Ecuadorian Habano wrapper, which I absolutely love. It's been a very popular wrapper leaf for several years now. And then you basically got a binder, which is a Mexican binder, and then Nicaraguan tobacco as a filler. Now, if you guys have any questions, wrapper, binder, filler, is that, yeah?
Makes sense.
The binder does not. The binder gets me. I know the filler.
So when you're you're looking at the cigar on the foot, right? So that is the filler, everything that, kind of in the inside, right? That makes sense. And then around that filler, you're going to use a binder leaf. And that's what kind of holds that together. Typically you'll go in a mold. And then what you see on the outside is the wrapper leaf. Now typically you have just the one wrapper leaf, but there are things like barber poles, but typically you're gonna have the one wrapper leaf. You'll have either one or two binders, and that is a structural thing, but at the same time, obviously it goes into the flavor because again, it's 100% tobacco in there. The interesting part about this one, and Nate, I don't know if you remember this or if you looked it up or not, but I always forget that Steve Saka actually used one leaf of Pennsylvania broadleaf in this as well.
I forgot about that.
Yeah. So it's a very unique blend, right? So it's got that, again, the Ecuadorian Habano. So you have the very popular wrapper leaf. You got a Mexican binder leaf, and then a bunch of Nicaraguan tobacco and one broadleaf from Pennsylvania in the United States, which is being used a bit more these years, but it's still not a widely used tobacco leaf. Now, it usually, in my opinion, Pennsylvania broadleaf, and Nate, I don't know if you can back me up on this or not, but I mean, especially if they use it as a wrapper leaf or multiple leaves in the filler, it definitely has a different flavor, and I don't think it comes across. It's like a recipe with this one, is that I think it just gives it a hint by being the one leaf of there.
No, that's right. I think the last cigar I smoked, or that I can recall, that had some Pennsylvania tobacco in it was one of Sam Lucia's. The Lucia Black had Pennsylvania Seco. And which was still an enjoyable cigar.
No, it absolutely was.
Yeah. But there's just not too many that are utilizing it because they gotta pay workers here in the field to tend to the crops, harvest the crop, hang it in the barns, and then they gotta ship it all the way to Nicaragua or Dominican Republic or Honduras or wherever the factory is, and then make the cigar and ship it all back. So there's a lot more labor and costs associated with using tobacco from the States, but it definitely gives it a very unique flavor and profile to it.
Yeah, I think it does too. I mean, this is something that this cigar, again, we go back to the price point on this one. I mean, the construction, in my opinion, is fantastic. I mean, Nate, I mean, you smoke a lot more cigars, obviously, and the construction on this is, I think, top notch. I mean, the draw, when we talk about construction, it's the draw. It's when you cut it, I think you've got a little bit of like an oily wrapper on this, You know, it's just a good looking cigar. Obviously, the marketing behind it, I love it. It's very simple, but with the crown on there, it looks really good on there. But the price, I mean, this cigar, at least on our shelf, is $14.50. I mean, it's not super high end, but it's also not your daily smoke for most people, because once you get to that kind of mid teens or higher, this is something that, you know, you got to know that you like it, or you get recommended. Like you guys were talking about, you know, with bourbons, you know, once it gets up to a certain price point, even nowadays, you know, $50, $60, I feel like you're walking in. We talk about it a lot on the podcast, is that you walk in the door in the bourbon world, at least in Ohio, between 40 and 50, you know, especially a lot of the newer, smaller companies. So for this to come in at like that $15 price point, it's definitely, you got to know what you're getting into, in my opinion.
Do you think?
Go ahead, Alaina.
Do you think so I don't smoke too many cigars. Are people very brand loyal? Because I think some of the friends that I've hung out in circles, they like just specific brands. Or I guess in your world, how do people make like decisions when it comes to picking their cigar if they have like a handful of options?
Yeah, so it's different for everyone. I mean, as you're getting into it, you hear several different things, and I'll equate this almost to the whiskey world first. So we had a question on here that's actually, I think, really goes into this. So Matt says, question, what is better, Dominican or American? And if he's talking about tobacco, that's, again, it's personal opinion. So when you go to whiskeys, you know, especially in the bourbon world, when we first started this podcast, you know, I remember when Jake was a part of it, you know, he's like, I don't do scotches. I don't drink scotch. And so it's almost like we have that in the tobacco world as well, is that, you know, I only like Dominican tobacco, or I only like Honduras. What do you have that's made in Nicaragua? What do you have that's made in Dominican Republic? Or, you know, what cigars are Dominican? The interesting part is that you don't, just because it's made in, for example, like this one, it's made in Nicaragua, right? So if someone comes in and says, I like Nicaraguan cigars, the follow-up question, if you're really dialing down into it, is, do you like Nicaraguan tobacco, or do you have certain brands that you like that are Nicaraguan? Because if you look at it, this Nicaraguan made cigar has Ecuadorian tobacco, it has Nicaraguan tobacco, it even has American tobacco. So you have, I think, people that are loyal based on what they know, what they like. You know, I prefer typically Nicaraguan tobacco, and I think a lot of the guys in our shop have kind of gravitated towards that. But when you have brand loyalty, it's kind of tough, because if someone comes out with one cigar that, say, this is a Sobremesa, and you really like that cigar, and you like the medium-bodied stuff with a lot of flavor, well, again, Steve Saka with Dunbarton Tobacco and Trust, his next cigar could be a milder cigar, because now he's building a portfolio. So I think you'll find that people, if they trust the maker or the brand, they will go to and try stuff because they trust that master blender if they've had some. But I don't know, Nate, what do you think about that question?
Well, that's one of the ways that sometimes I will sell some of Steve Saka's cigars, because we carry 3 of them in the shop, and none of them bear his name. There's no cigar that we carry that it says Steve Saka on it. So there's not the name of the company on the cigar. But when I ask people, okay, what are some cigars that you've had that you enjoy? If they name, one of the cigars that he helped create with the previous company he was with, I'm like, oh, if you like that cigar, the mastermind behind that cigar, Steve Saka, here's what he makes. Or if you like this cigar from this company, this cigar that Steve Saka makes is comparable, but about $8 less expensive. So it all depends on the customer. With Steve being fairly new on his own, I don't think there's a whole lot of brand name loyalty to him, just because he hasn't been on his own for very long, and he doesn't have a huge portfolio, so he doesn't necessarily cater to every smoker.
It right now, though.
He is, but the people that have had his cigars, I've never had anyone smoke one of his cigars that we carry at the shop and not like it.
Interesting.
So everything he's making, he's making very good, high quality cigars. It's just not necessarily a name people know unless they know some of his history and past and some of the other projects he had a hand on.
Yeah, it's funny. Tyler Jones, he said if anyone,
he loves Steve.
He does, and he said if the ladies are curious, and that goes for anyone out there, because Jeff is saying, great question, ladies. Mild, medium, full size. It's what we tell newbies. I mean, that's a way to dial it down. But he said if you're curious, look up a YouTube video about Steve Saka, like an interview. He's very, very knowledgeable, extremely knowledgeable. The other thing I like about Steve Saka is that he is very, very straightforward. For example, the first year at the there's an annual trade show in the tobacco world for retailers, and he had started the company. He had blends. He had the cigars necessarily, sort of. Sorry, someone's commenting here. It's kind of funny, but anyways, he had all the blends. He had cigars. He didn't actually have cigars with him. They weren't ready, and yet he still set up a booth at the trade show with couches, with like signage, all this stuff. And then I remember seeing an interview with him. He is so, again, straightforward that he basically was like, yeah, no, I still wanted to come to the trade show, talk to people, and tell them about the cigars. If you like the cigars, you're going to buy them when they come. When I have them, I don't have them; they're not ready. But I didn't want to bail on everyone. If you don't like them, you're not going to buy them. And like that's just like his business model at that point, which I absolutely love the straightforwardness, because he wasn't. I mean, he has great marketing, but he's not trying to sell you on the image and anything. He's just like he's a tobacco guy. It's just like the juice in a bottle. The actual. It's not. Yes, it's cool to have a nice looking bottle. It's nice to have a a good label on there. Cool story. Everyone's big into stories and all that stuff. And it's the name and what jumps off the shelf. But once you crack the bottle, once you light the cigar, that's what I like about Steve Saka, is that he just flat out is just like, if you light it up and you like it, you're going to buy more. You don't like it, no, there's other cigars out there. Hopefully you'll try another one of mine. If not, hopefully other people will like my cigars. I just like that attitude.
Yeah.
It's impressive.
Yeah.
When we got the Sin Compromiso in,
which is another cigar from Steve Saka.
That's his newest cigar. It's called Sin Compromiso, and it comes in, depending on the size, it's coming in $16 to $18. So it's even more expensive than this cigar.
Wow.
But then some of our customers, that price isn't really an option for them. It's not a hurdle at all for them, knowing what they like to smoke. So one of our regulars who recently moved to Atlanta, he loved that other project that Steve did with his old company. And so when we got that cigar in, I was like, hey, try this, because it's a new one from Steve. And I couldn't tell you how many times we've had to reorder that cigar just in the brief time it's been out on the market, because plus it's got a very nice kind of a Celtic band to it. Yeah. So just the marketing on that comes across very nice too.
Interesting. So do cigars, like when there's like a certain kind, like this has a name, another cigar has a name, like the $16, $18, you said you had to reorder it. Do those just like get invented and last forever? Or are they more like single barrel picks with bourbon and whiskey, where it's like you have a limited quantity you can make?
Yeah, it's a great question.
Good question.
So basically, we had a guest, and he's coming back on, and Ricky Rodriguez. So he's the master blender for CAO. And CAO is in the portfolio of, so Altadis is one of our sponsors. General Cigar is probably their equivalent, right? So that's two big companies in the cigar industry. And CAO, when he comes up with a blend, and it's going to be a regular production, it would be something that he said somewhere in the ballpark of, he has to have enough tobacco to do about, he said like 3 years. Basically, he's thinking about 900, close to 1 million cigars worth of tobacco, if I recall correctly, that he would then feel comfortable with the blend being a regular production, because now you have enough of that tobacco. So if it is a hit, you're not going to be constantly running out. Now it's just like with the grains and everything that's being used in whiskeys. Everyone expects, a bottle of whiskey. If you grab a bottle of just Ezra Brooks, you grab a bottle of Four Roses, Buffalo Trace, some of these, and then the single barrels are probably the biggest ones like you're talking about. Not necessarily limited, but one that is called single barrel. The general consumer expects it to taste the same every time, and that's just not the case. With cigars, you're going to have some variations from crop to crop, but with the aging process, with everything else, they try to make it as consistent as possible when it comes to that. Jonathan Herring's chiming in. He's actually with CAO in general. He says he was on that podcast. He says, for 3 years, 1.5 million cigars up front.
Oh,
So
wow.
you will also see from a lot of companies the small batches in a sense, where it'll be a limited production, and they'll say we only are making 50,000 cigars because that's the tobacco they have. And sometimes it's just a rare. I'd say most of the time it's going to be a wrapper leaf, that they have a small yield of a wrapper leaf that they really want to use, but they can't make it a regular production cigar, because if you start that, as you guys would expect, is you start that cigar and then you run out of that wrapper leaf, but you have something similar, you got people hooked, then you're going to lose the credibility, because they're like, they used to be good, now they're not, and then it becomes kind of a hearsay thing, and if there's any real backing to the story, then you're going to be in trouble long term.
Yeah, and one of the other things is, you may not know, ladies, is typically on your average cigar, that single wrapper leaf, because it's got to have the right flavor, the right look to it, no blemishes, no marks on it, no cracks in it. Typically that, and it's half the leaf plant. So you have your whole leaf. They're using half of it for one cigar, half of it for another cigar. But even then, they still trim it down to fit that shape or whatever size they're doing. But that one tobacco leaf typically costs more than all the other tobacco in that cigar combined.
Wow. Oh, wow.
Because it's harder to get the type of leaf you want to have the right appearance to it. No blemishes. It's got the right color. Because it's really off-putting if you open a box of cigars and you got two cigars right next to each other that are different shades. One's lighter, one's darker. They want to make everything as uniform as possible. And because of the climates and the conditions and all the process and how many hands actually touch a cigar from the time it's planted to the time it's put in a box, it's very difficult to get enough tobacco leaves to make that wrapper on a consistent basis.
Got it. There's so much that goes into it.
Very similar to the whiskey world, honestly.
Yeah.
Very similar. That's why it goes hand in hand, I think, not only by, smoking and drinking together, but as far as talking about the two, there's a lot of similarities. And it's one of the things that I always bring. We've talked about several times that when we met Eddie Russell, Jake, who used to be part of it, Dustin, who's on the feed, we met Eddie Russell, and it was with some bartenders and other people, and Ann Dimmick was there. She was a recent guest when she was with the company, but everyone was asking, about the whiskeys itself and just everything, and the way my mind works with the tobacco, and I raised my hand and I said, how much is it, based on the actual grains? Everyone talks about the percentage of corn and malted barley and rye and all that stuff, but you never see, at least I've never seen it, on any of these reviews of where the grains come from, how important it is from the very, very start. I feel like even on a lot of the podcasts and everything else and the blogs, no one dives into that part of it.
Yeah.
And he had a great comment where, over the years with Wild Turkey, that they've got their farmers that they have a very, very close relationship with. And they have a way they talk about the microwave test with some of the grains, if you've ever heard of that, where they know what it's supposed to smell like and everything else. So they have these tests to do it. But I find that, the whiskey world, if all these tours, unless they really are doing their own grains, they have their own farms on some of the smaller ones. Just had Watershed on. They use some of their own grains as far as that goes. But it's just interesting to me that the similarities are so common between the two of them. But when it comes down to the way people talk about cigars and tobacco, they talk about the farms, they talk about the where it comes from, how old it is, and all that stuff. And I feel like the whiskey world is more like, well, what's the overall age statement of how long is it in the barrel?
How much wood am I going to taste? And that's the funny part too, because the trees that go into making the barrel, we had a very, very long conversation with Greta from Maker's Mark, and the tree science that goes into a single barrel. It is fascinating. It is almost more intense than the corn.
Yeah.
There's the rings and waste, and it's fascinating. But I mean, it's like things like the barrel is your wrapper leaf. Like, it's so rare, it's so picky. You have to be very intentional about the cuts of wood that go into your barrel, and you have to be very intentional about the kind of leaf you're wrapping your cigar in. It's crazy.
That's absolutely right.
We've got a local Stumpies here right over the bridge in Illinois. They do, I forgot how many acres. I think they have maybe over 100 acres, and they do all their corn on site, everything that they use for all their alcohol. They do, I know they do whiskey and vodka. I'm not sure if they do a gin or not, but anyway, yeah, they use everything on site, but not too many, like you said, not too many distilleries have the ability to do that unless they're doing pretty small production or they have a lot of land.
Well, I find that too, like in conversation, when you talk about bourbons, it's just kind of, it's not as glamorous, the farming side of it. You know what I mean? But
that's definitely not.
Well, somebody who works in agriculture myself, it's a lot of people think that the consumer thinks that their food just shows up at the grocery store, and they have no concept of there's such a beauty to farming in itself, and the farmer is super unappreciated. They're not talked about. They're underappreciated. All the work that goes into, nitrogen levels in the soil and all the science behind crop protection and, how they grow it. And I imagine tobacco's the same way.
Very much so. Yeah. The region is a big part with that, as far as that goes, even in like Nicaragua, for example, you have the 4 major regions, and even even on one farm in one region, the farmers know like each lot is numbered, and they know how they react and how sometimes they have to rotate from one lot to the other to give it, rest or whatever it might be. But it's absolutely all the way down to that level. Absolutely.
Crazy.
Yeah. I have a fun first cigar story if we have time for it. So
we got time.
So when I think it was about 4 or 5 years ago, I may or may not have illegally traveled. I don't know if it was illegally, but I went to Cuba.
It was illegal.
When was this?
Yeah, it was like right when we were opening up. The U.S. was opening up to Cuba travels, and I was in Mexico for one of my best friend's weddings, and I was like, I'm just gonna go to Havana. So I booked an Airbnb on like the Australian Airbnb website.
Nice.
And
this was not legal.
No. Well,
it might have been before it was opened up completely.
Yeah. So I show up in one of the Cancun airport. I asked a guy, I was like, how do I get a visa? And he's like, oh, I'll send you over to some other guy across the airport. And I gave him $20, and he signed a piece of paper and pencil and handed it to me. And he's like, yeah, you should be fine. So I get over to
Just
Cuba.
Don't erase it, okay?
Yeah, I was gonna say, getting into Cuba is not always the problem. It's leaving Cuba.
Well, yeah, it was a whole ordeal. But I got there. They're like, do you want me to stamp your passport? I was like, no, it's fine. So they just stamp a blank piece of paper. I go in.
Yeah, definitely not legal.
Yeah. I had to trade my money before you get there because none of your credit cards work and stuff. So I had some friends that really wanted cigars. So I was staying at this home. It was a huge mansion, and
beautiful.
It was absolutely incredible. And the whole family lived there. It was like 2 or 3 generations of families that lived there. So I was renting a room, and I said, can I, how do I get some Cuban cigars? He's like, oh, I've got a friend, who has a friend, and
always
we'll take you over, and they can take some cigars from the factory and you can just buy them. And I was like, sure, whatever. Sounds good. I just want I forgot what the amount was that I could bring back into the United States, but I was like, I think I got 20 or 25, whatever the rule was. And so it was like the middle of the night. I go with the one guy who about my age.
Daylight? Are you kidding?
Yeah, no, it was the middle of the night. It was the day before I was supposed to leave. And he's like, oh, did you still want to get those cigars? I was like, yeah, can we get them tonight? And he's like, oh yeah. So it's like 10 or 11 o'clock at night. And we go over, he's like, I'm going to take you over to this person's house. So we go in the middle of nowhere, and we go over to this person's house, and this guy answers the door in his underwear.
Right. You kind of intruded on him, but I mean,
I was like, oh, here we go. This
super
is
legit.
not weird at all. And he's like, oh, he's talking to me in Spanish, and I'm like, oh yeah, 20 cigars, whatever. Handed him the money, and I was like, I have no clue if these are legitimate or what's going on, but yeah, it gives me the box, the cigars, and I go on my merry way, and I fly back into Mexico. Of course, I never ever get stopped, but I get stopped for my luggage, and I'm like holding my breath. I'm like, oh no, I'm gonna get in trouble in the Mexican airport. I'm gonna end up in jail. And
the good news, you were back in Mexico already, so that's a plus. That's a win column there.
Yeah. I've traveled through a lot of Central and South America, and money can pretty much bribe you through any situation. So
for sure,
the guy was going through, and he kind of like counted them, but I also was like trying to talk to him to distract him, which was probably slightly annoying as well. And he's like, yeah, sure, whatever. And he like throws my suitcase. He's like, yeah, go. So I was like, oh yeah. So now I just have to make it to the US. So I flew into Chicago, and I would have gone through customs in St. Louis. The long and short of it, my flight got canceled. I ended up flying like in the air for multiple hours, and I barely missed my flight into St. Louis. And so I ended up going, I'm not sure if I went through customs in Chicago or not, but either way, I ended up being stuck in Southwest Airlines was like, you're going to be stuck in Chicago, and we're not, because it was not weather related. We're not going to pay for anything. So I was like, I'm just renting a car and I'm getting home. This is a really long day. I started this evening in the middle of the night with some guy wearing underwear trying to get Cuban cigars from his house.
And he had underwear on again. Win columns there.
Yeah, true. And I was like, okay, so I go to rent a car.
The boxers or briefs?
It was like whitey.
Was it a gentleman or?
It was
whitey tighties. All right,
yeah, full on whitey tighties. And so,
all right, well, it's not a total win.
So
remember, Steve, it's Cuba. It's not Miami. Come on.
Right, true. And so limited resources. But I get into Chicago, and all the cars are sold out. And the lady that I was trying to like rent the car through, she was like, "Oh, that guy's going to St. Louis." And I turned to this guy, never met before, and I was like, "Are you going to St. Louis?" He's like, "Yeah." And he goes, me and my wife are going on, I don't know if it was their honeymoon or something. He goes, I got to make it back like immediately. I can drop you off close to my house. We ended up living only 4 or 5. Well, he lived close to my parents. He was 4 or 5 miles from my parents' house. So at 5 o'clock in the morning, this random stranger, we drove through the night. His wife was not happy about it.
Was the wife with you?
No, it was just me. What'd you say?
I said there are like 8 times in this 2-minute story where you could have just gotten murdered.
Yeah.
I was going to say, this is what reminds me of, this is like a true crime podcast at this point of what not to do.
All of the stories go. When Alaina travels, this is the story she comes home with. I'm like, how did you come back not in a coffin? This is insane.
This is the backstory on the first 48.
Yeah,
it's like the true crime story. It's like, 2 girls picked up a hitchhiker in the middle of the woods. I'm like, well, I know how this ends.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't even read the description. It's like, and then you're like, oh, yeah.
It's so fun. So I call my parents along the way, and I was trains, planes, and automobiles. Totally, like those are like my favorite movie growing up.
Absolutely, right there.
And I remember calling my mom, and I was like, hey, this guy's gonna drop me off at your house. I got to spend the night, and I'm gonna go home. The next morning. Can you just make sure the garage, I got the code and all that. And her reaction, because she's so used to these type of situations with me, she's like, oh yeah, sure. She's like, just text me whenever you get in, so I know you made it in safe. And I was,
this is your mom?
Yeah.
She's used to that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh, that poor woman. Yeah.
All right.
I will say that Cuba was
if you have daughters, be aware.
Cuba was the toughest for me because I literally couldn't get any internet connection or any phone connection or anything. Nope. Message to tell them, hey, I'm saying that's usually what I do when I'm traveling. Even if I go to remote, like I've been in the middle of nowhere, Philippines, and I still was able to get like a phone connection to send an email. But yeah, no, Cuba, they actually, you have to go to streets near hotels or places that have major Wi-Fi, and you buy a piece of paper off of a guy on
Wi-Fi card, yeah.
And it's a Wi-Fi code and you see so many people lined up on the street, and they're all on Wi-Fi, just bouncing off of their Wi-Fi with their little code. So
yeah.
it's an adventure.
happy to hear that you're still alive, which is good. If anyone's listening to these stories, the Bourbon and BS podcast does not endorse any of these actions while you're traveling abroad or even locally, even though Uber is now a thing where you literally are getting in the car with a stranger on a daily basis. But, you know,
the murder rate is low.
It's
Yeah.
it's low. Is that? I think that's on the Uber website.
Is it?
It's not. No.
If it's not, it should be. There's that girl in Chicago who got a machete from her Uber driver, chopped up.
Wow.
So
that's a bad day. That is a bad day.
That's
Chicago.
Yeah.
Easy. That is a good story. Cuba. I would recommend going to Cuba. I went to Cuba in 2018. Things were opened up a bit more. I went with people that have been down several times, so I knew about the Wi-Fi cards. We had a hookup as far as a built-in friend/tour guide. So,
nice.
Yeah, I didn't really see. Besides the guys I was staying with, I didn't really see any strangers in their underwear or anything like that. But
well, then you didn't experience Cuba, right?
I know you said right as a question, but no, I experienced Cuba right.
Yeah. Did you go down south where the tobacco fields are?
So, I went to Pino del Rio. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It was fantastic. And again, having the connections, we've talked about it in previous episodes, but it's very cool because we were able to get into the different cigar shops, different Casa de Habanos. Right. We were able to get into like the VIP rooms because the one gentleman, especially Mark, has been down several times. He has a locker in a couple of the shops, which is fairly unheard of for Americans. He's really worked he's a tremendous gentleman, and he's worked a network just because he is such a nice guy. So yeah, I experienced Cuba in a different way, and it was very good. But yeah, I met some of the farmers and was able to smoke farm rolls and custom rolls and stuff like that. So those were legit because they came literally off the farm. And it's interesting, just for a quick fact, is that in Cuba, the farmers actually sell 90% to the government, and then they keep 10% of their yield to be able to make cigars for themselves and for family and friends or whatever. But they definitely do sell some of them kind of to tourists as well. So it's cool. It's a fantastic country to visit. It's sad about some of the things, obviously the way things are down there, but it's a very fascinating place. And if you do it the right way or Alaina's way, I think you're going to enjoy it.
Depends on what you're into.
It is. It's just, yeah, it's like stepping back in time. It
really
awesome. I'm a huge classic car fan, so just seeing all the classic cars on the street and how creative people have been with cars in the 50s and how they do maintenance on it. Like they're not getting imported parts, so they take parts from other vehicles and they just really put it together to make their cars right. It's a really
our driver down there is great gentleman, Roy, and he has a passed down 50s Bel Air. So it was his grandfather's car, and then it was his father, and now it's his, and he's a taxi driver, but he, you can secure him as a driver for the week if you want to, or for a day or whatever. And just an awesome guy. And it's interesting. Yeah. The Bel Air, it looks original on the outside. The interior is really nice, but it's got like a kind of external looking, like bolted on air conditioner in there. And then it's got I think it was a Hyundai 4-cylinder diesel with a Hyundai transmission that he put in there. I mean, they are absolutely just Frankensteining cars down there as best they can, as long as it looks original. But I mean, they don't want. It was funny. He showed me they have a version of like a Craigslist. They call it. I think Amazon was the app, but it was like a Craigslist, and there was the identical car on there for 40,000 kook, which is another story altogether. Is that how in that country that anyone can afford a 40,000 kook car? Like it's definitely a black market type of a society as well. But he said it's all original, and he wouldn't want that because gasoline's more expensive and harder to find, and the mileage isn't as good. And when like to your point, the original parts, they can't get American parts, so they wouldn't want that. As soon as something breaks, now you're gonna have to find a new motor, you're gonna have to find a new transmission, you're gonna have to do all the stuff that he's already done. So it's definitely a different world, and it's fantastic. I want to go back if I can. Ryan Jones says, I'll just go to Cuba and walk around in my underwear. So again, combination of the two trips. I mean, whatever you want to do. Make the best of what you want. Home. Yeah, Cuba is what you make of it. With that, guys, let's do this. Let's go around the circle here, and what would you give the cigar, the whiskey, and the pairing individually? The 3 scores, 1 out of 10. 10 being the best. We'll start with Alaina.
Let's see. I think the whiskey, I would say 7 is 7-8 would be fair. The cigar, I mean, not being too much of an aficionado, I would say 7. Together,
they pair well.
I think they pair well. I'd say 7-8.
Nice. Abby?
Oh no.
You want to pass? I mean,
no, I'm not going to pass.
Not many people here.
She's going to defer to the second half.
The whiskey, I would say, I don't know. It's up there for me. I'd probably give it like an 8.2. Let's get technical.
Very specific.
The cigar, I love medium-bodied cigars. This is great. I'd probably give it like a 7.5. Okay. I don't know if I've had a 10 cigar, to be perfectly honest. Sure. Together, I'm going for like 7.5, 8, or right in the middle there, like a solid C, B-.
Wow.
I don't know.
Pretty much my whole school experience.
There you go.
Like a C-.
You got a degree.
Did I pass?
Yeah. Pass, fail. You guys pass. That's perfect.
Now you guys are probably going to rate them really low and make us look like idiots.
I like, you had a lot of pressure on you. You have no idea, how to, that's good. No, it's your scale, so it doesn't really matter.
Mm-hmm.
Nate?
I'm getting ready to light up my second Sobremesa.
Are you going 2-fer?
Yes, I am. I give the Sobremesa a 9. I absolutely love this cigar. I know it's a little, pricier than what I typically buy in the shop. Sometimes I might use this as my shift cigar. But I absolutely love this cigar. I've never had any construction issues with it. The Mi Querida from Steve Saka, sometimes I get a little bit tight head of the cigar, so the draw is a little constricted. But it also falls, well under the price point of the Sin Compromiso. So I absolutely love this cigar. I give it a 9. The whiskey, I give this one an 8. I really enjoy this. It's much more enjoyable than I was expecting, having never had it. But I've had the Ezra Brooks 2-year rye, which I absolutely love. That is absolutely one of my favorite steel bottles, because if I can find it here in Ohio, that's about an $11 bottle, and I absolutely love that.
You buy like 3 or 4 at a time, if I recall correctly.
At least. Yes. As far as the pairing, I give the pairing an 8. And I say that because I don't think either one enhances one or the other. They don't necessarily as much cinnamon and kind of that heat you get from the whiskey. It doesn't take anything away from the cigar, I don't think. Or if it does, it doesn't really take a whole lot of flavor away from the cigar. But the cigar, even being a medium body, holds up to the whiskey.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, so the Sobremesa, again, I do like to bring in the price point. So for $14, $15 for this size, and this is a 6x52, if I'm not mistaken, Toro size or so. It's just really well constructed, medium bodied. This is a complex cigar. I think you get a lot of flavors from it. I've always enjoyed this cigar. The size I like a lot because it has time to develop, I feel like, as you smoke through it. Mm-hmm. And the construction, like I said, is fantastic. It never really heats up. You don't have to, when we're talking on a podcast or you're having an intense conversation, you may have to touch it up or relight it. But for the most part, I haven't had to do a whole lot with it. I think Steve Saka did a fantastic job. I think this is one of, at least when I spoke with him last, this was one of his favorites as well for the same reasons. And so, yeah, I definitely give this one a 9 as well. which is saying something, because again, at that price point, you've got, I feel like you're more demanding of what you're going to get out of a cigar at a higher price point. The Old Ezra 7 barrel strength by itself, for $50, you know, what else is out there? I think I'd give it an 8. I think this is a really solid bottle. I enjoy it. It's an easy sipper, but it's exactly that. It's a sipper, which is what I can appreciate about it as well. This is not one that, you know, as the night goes on. Now, maybe if you get towards halfway through a bottle, you're going to kick them back, because at that point, who the hell cares? But with it starting off, I think there's that cinnamon, there's that heat. It's something that you expect from a barrel strength, but it's not overpowering. I feel like it goes really well with a lot of things as far as maybe a nightcapper by itself. Mm-hmm. So 8. Pairing 7, 6 or 7. It's there's too much on the barrel strength for me. It's taken away from the cigar. When I'm smoking a cigar, it's fine. Take a sip of that, it almost shocks it. I don't. Mm-hmm. It's not in a sense it's not a bad pairing. I just feel like this is not what I would choose to smoke with the bottle, and this is not what I would choose to drink with the cigar. I think, you know, if we were to try to seek out other things, I feel like we would find a better pairing. So again, if you guys have both of these, and
would you smoke a cigar?
What's that?
Would you smoke a stronger cigar with this? With the spice, I'm almost wanting to try like the BS Silver with it.
That I think that'd be too much, but maybe. I think with the cigar, I'd almost look for a little more of like a creamier cigar, medium bodied, definitely, so it would stand up to it. But I don't know. I'm trying to think of one that I would like. But yeah, if you have a BS Silver, so ladies, BS Silver has got a lot of pepper to it, so that's why I feel like if you're going from like a little bit of a heat and some of that cinnamon I was talking about, in my opinion, in my palate, and then you go to pepper, I feel like I'm just beating myself up at that point, possibly.
A lot.
It's a lot.
So
and then if you throw in like a 90-degree day, then I'm just like miserable and I just want to go home. I don't want to do any of this.
Let me ask this.
Yeah.
With, I'm going to butcher the name, Sobremesa?
That's right.
Cigar?
Yeah.
What, out of the bourbons and whiskeys that you love, what would you pair the cigar with?
I think an easy one, because it's one of my tops. I think it goes with almost anything because it is smooth. Eagle Rare. I think Eagle Rare would go really well with it, because I think you got a little sweetness and you don't have a whole lot of spice, I feel like, with Eagle Rare. I think that's an easy one because I think a lot of people like Eagle Rare for the price point. We have a hard time finding it here in Ohio. Very difficult time. It's very limited as far as releases here, but it's in the $30 to $35 price point. So I mean, it's a great bottle for that. I'm trying to look up here.
What about 107?
Yeah, because
107 is the same price point as this.
Yeah, but it's not now. Yeah, but now it's not quite as hot. Maybe, I don't know. That's tough. Sobremesa, it's almost like I might even start flirting with some Irish whiskeys with that one. So because a little lighter on some of them.
I was thinking maybe Angel's Envy.
Angel's Envy, maybe just not a barrel strength. Maybe that's for Sobremesa. Maybe I'm looking for more of a 100, like a bottle and bond, 100, or give or take, 90 to 100, somewhere in there. More of an easy drinker.
Jonathan has questions.
Yeah, Jonathan, as we round out part one here, and we'll get into this, Jonathan. Actually, I'm going to hold this question, but could someone give me a quick recap of what these ladies do in the industry? I was late. And it's your fault, Jonathan. You need to listen to the whole podcast. No, Jonathan, if you have time, hopefully you stay tuned for part two, because I think we're going to get into that a little bit further here. So with that, if there's nothing else, I'm going to say thank you guys for being a part of part one, episode 117. Just so you guys, I'll throw it up here if you guys are watching. We did.
And it's 117 proof.
It is that.
I didn't even, really? Oh yeah.
I didn't even plan that. That's perfect. I wish I was that clever.
Yeah, just accept it and take credit. Own it.
Yeah, not too late. Featured cigar was a Sobremesa, so that's what we were smoking tonight. Check it out. I'm gonna keep smoking it. Nate lit up another one, and then the featured whiskey was the Old Ezra 7-year barrel strength. And then I do want to round out part one. If you guys are listening on the audio, definitely listen to part two. If you guys are listening on Facebook Live or YouTube Live, you're watching the video after the fact, stay tuned. We're going to roll into part two, but I want to thank our sponsors for part one, patreon.com/Bourbon and BS podcast. If you guys want to be a part of this, we had a new sponsor tonight, so a new patron. Thank you very much for the support. It helps this thing keep going. Also, Tinderbox at Easton for providing the Sobremesa, fantastic cigar, and we appreciate that support. Altadis USA, I'm going to be lighting up second. I'm not going to go for a twofer like Nate is. I'm going to be lighting up the H. Upmann Hispaniola from Altadis USA, makers of Monte Cristo, H. Upmann, Romeo, and countless others of fantastic products. And also BS Cigar Company, the gold and silver are currently in stock. If you guys are interested, go ahead and email bscigarcompany@gmail.com, or you can contact us through the podcast, and we'll hook you guys up with what you need to do to purchase some. We'll ship them out. If you're in the Columbus area, stop by Tinderbox at Easton. They do carry that cigar brand. So we appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, and everyone else out there, appreciate part one. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks for joining us. Happy Whiskey Wednesday, everyone. Stay tuned for part two. Anyone need a break?
No.
Goes a little longer than a half hour like your guys'. I'm sorry.
I'm here for it. My cigar's
Yeah.
still going.
Bingo.
Got whiskey and drinks. I've probably got like 8 cups right around me. It's fine.
I know, same. I brought a bottle up just in case.
Yeah, I got
Abby,
Buffalo
that
Trace.
looks like a giant glass of water that Abby
Oh.
has.
I know.
So-
I had a water bottle that.
I ordered these on Amazon. It's like the size of my face.
That is large.
Literally.
It's like-
Is that a
says
quart?
It's 32 ounces, which I
That's
didn't
my
really
water.
understand. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, you even have it filtered. That's cute. I'm a tap water kind of
Shoot.
person.
I mean, it's healthy. But
Don't know how the water is in Ohio.
That's a good point.
It's pretty good. It's pretty good.
Pretty good.
not bad. Not bad.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's not Louisville, but it works.
That's right. For anyone that's hanging tight, we're not going to take too long on the break here, but I do want to throw it up there. If you guys have any questions for the Bourbon and Blondes, feel free to ask. I know we're going to lead in with what Jonathan Herring had asked. Because, again, if you tuned in a little late, you may not have. We didn't really cover a whole lot of what you guys do for a living and what you're doing for the industry. But, yeah, I think you guys have definitely proven to anyone that has not listened to your podcast that it's definitely one to check out. It's a very enjoyable podcast. You guys do it every other week, correct? Is that about right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're kind of on a holding pattern right now because we're trying to figure out the whole recording remote thing.
Right.
We're not very good at it because we are people who like to be around other people. So they'll pick up again here soon. We're going to start doing Thursday night lives. So
yeah, no, it's good. And this platform is really easy. We've had a lot of good feedback on this, and it'll be interesting to go back to where everyone is in the garage again, and the guests and the people at the same table as me. It'll be almost like a retraining for everyone, including myself. But we'll do it.
we have to wear pants again.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to learn how to run.
Again. You're right.
That
I'm gonna
too.
have to learn how to run StreamYard.
Yes, you are. I got to train you now.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Yeah, normally I just run the soundboard. So
You guys have a whole soundboard?
yeah, because we
We
used to
use
have
like some features on it. Don't get carried away.
Okay.
we used to have just one mic in the center of the table, but the problem was that mic picked up everything in the garage, whether it was the hiss from the propane heater, someone in the back drop a lighter like Kyle. It picks up everything. And I was able to get a soundboard from my old church that they didn't use anymore. And then one of our patrons bought some mics. And so since I have experience running a soundboard, now every single person that's at the table has their own microphone, and the audio quality is just a lot better.
Yeah, it works really well.
Yeah, Steve's using one of the mics, I'm using one of the mics, and it just sounds so much more clear.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of separate mics, and I just got what do you call it? A Zoom H6, so it's like a little mini recording device, and it's just I'm our producer, and I'm not technologically like advanced.
Right.
I like have trouble with
Neither of us
from time to
are.
time. So it's been a big learning curve, but it's exciting.
All right, and I think let's talk about that in part two here. Let's roll into part two, because hobby or lifestyle. I think that we all in this podcast right here is kind of walks the line between the two of those things on a lot of different parts of our life. So let me kick this off here for part two. Welcome back to the Bourbon and BS podcast. This is episode 117, part 2. We appreciate everyone joining in. We have a special guest. If you guys have not listened to part 1 on the audio, make sure you check out 117, part 1. We went over the Sobremesa cigar. We were drinking the Old Ezra 7-year barrel strength. And we have a lot to talk about on that one, about bourbon in general, whiskeys, cigars, a lot of good conversation, a lot of good questions as well, not only from the people on this podcast, this episode, but also from the Facebook Live and the YouTube Live. So if you guys are available on Wednesdays, 7:30 Eastern Standard Time, check us out on Facebook Live, also YouTube Live. And if you guys want to follow, like, all that good stuff on Facebook, you guys can get alerts on when we go live. So every Wednesday, and be a part of the conversation. I do want to thank our sponsors, Tinderbox at Easton. We had the featured cigar, Sobremesa, Altadis USA, as well. For what I'm about to light up is the H. Upmann Hispaniola. So we appreciate Josh and Paul being a part of this and really kind of backing us with Altadis. They make great cigars, Monte Cristo, Romeo Julieta, H. Upmann, countless others. And they've supported us for another year contract. We appreciate your guys' support. Also, BS Cigar Company, the Gold and Silver are available. Check it out if you guys have not had that yet. They have been selling very well and very enjoyable cigars. The Gold is 100% from Plasencia tobacco, 100% Nicaraguan tobacco. And the BS Silver is made by Espinosa Cigars. And again, is 100% Nicaraguan tobacco. Also, patreon.com. We appreciate everyone's support on Patreon. Patreon.com/Bourbon and BS podcast. You guys are awesome. It's been very, very helpful, flattering, and amazingly supporting from you guys and supporting us. We appreciate that. So, with part two, the topic tonight, while we're going to smoke and drink a little bit more with Bourbon and Blondes, if you guys did not check out part one or you're just tuning in on the live, we've got Alaina and Abby from Bourbon and Blondes. They run a podcast. It's available on iTunes, Spotify, everything else. I think everything that we're probably available on as well for Bourbon and BS podcast. So the promos for this was Bourbon and BS meets Bourbon and Blondes. I think it's very fitting. So welcome, Alaina and Abby, to part two. The topic is hobby or lifestyle, because looking at the screen right now and having you guys on, we've got Alaina, Abby, Nate, and myself. Bourbon, for one, is something that I feel like is a prime example, especially this day and age, and the communities that we run with and the people that are listening a lot of times here. It becomes a hobby. It's an interest. And then the more you dive into it, all of a sudden it's consuming. And I'm not just talking about drinking more. I'm talking about just it's consuming. It's fascinating. It's the people you meet. It's everything. I mean, the whole thing I kind of wanted to discuss with you guys, because, with Nate and myself, cigars are the same way. There's certain things I feel like hobby are things, and when I was looking up like definitions for it's things that you do for pleasure. It's something that is almost like a distraction from the everyday world. And a lifestyle is obviously much more than that. It's something that becomes everyday life. It becomes a part of your personality. So I want to say, with bourbon, what do you guys think as far as, is it more of a hobby? Is it a lifestyle? I mean, we had Jonathan Herring in the end of part one. He had asked, he tuned in late. He was tardy. And he asked, what was the actual question here?
What do these ladies do in the industry?
Yeah, what do they ladies do in the industry?
I mean, we
in
drink.
the spirits industry, we drink and we talk about it, and we tell stories about what happens when we drink. We've done a lot of things to support our local industry, so different bars and things like that. But our careers, I guess you could say, the podcast is, I would almost say, a hobby at this point. And then our day in and day out careers are unrelated to the spirits industry.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah.
We kind of do a lot.
Abby, what do you do for your career?
I know you're going to meet each other. I love this. It's perfect.
It's great. I focus on numbers and if they make sense and what we should do and blah, 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 all kinds of, I don't know, financial analyst, accountant.
Oh.
It's like the next level of accounting. It's like you've got your debits and credits, and then you've got, okay, well, do our debits and credits fall into the line of where we want the business to grow? And what do we want it to do? Are we incentivizing our people enough? Are we making enough money? It's all numbers. It's all money. I don't know. It gets very dry. And then I start talking about it, and people are like, deadpan, their eyes glaze over. I'm like, okay, cool. So about bourbon, we got this. This is a good conversation.
And we're back. Yeah, with bourbon.
Yeah, I always default to either bourbon or nonprofit work that I do. My career is very unexciting for a lot of people.
As long as you enjoy it.
Right.
It's fun. I'm a numbers person. That's why I went with 8.2 on the rating. I don't know what you want from me. It's weird.
Yeah. Even taking it out just to tenths, I feel like you were holding back there.
8.23.
I only be a nerd so much. All right, people, stop listening.
Alaina, how about you? What do you do then? If for the industry was the question.
Yeah. So the same with. I mean, I've been in the hospitality industry, I guess you could say, for my entire life. I either worked in restaurants or casinos or catering side. Right now, I do the event planning side. I was a wedding photographer for 4 or 5 years. I do portrait photography now, but I do events, mostly nonprofit, galas, some weddings. And like Abby said, especially right now, we're trying to focus on like what we were initially focusing on when we started the podcast last year was, how can we get people more engaged into trying bourbon or whiskey? Yeah. How can we make it more approachable especially to women? A lot of times we talk to a lot of women in our community and they were just like, oh, I just drink wine, and that's totally fine to drink wine, vodka, whatever you prefer. But we think that bourbon and whiskey can be for anyone, whether it's a cocktail, whether it's neat, with on the rocks, whatever the case is. So what we're trying to gear towards, hopefully soon when we can have contact with other human beings in one room again. We want to do cocktail classes. We want to do education classes, just make it approachable and easy. And we're trying to do some fundraising activities right now for our local community, for all the bartenders and the people in the industry that are out of work. So we're trying to work on that as well right now, especially during the pandemic. So, and then personally, I do event planning. I've worked for a corporation for 12 years in marketing, and I am not a numbers person. That's why me and Abby make such a good team. Yeah. I've worked in the creative industry for most of my life, and we're both creative, but we both have different skill sets, and it makes it that much easier to get things done.
Yeah. Well, this is a good question actually, because so Kevin has a question, and Kevin, since you're listening, you had a great piece tonight on the news as well, by the way. So Kevin, I love it. He's a reporter, so he has a very interesting, good way of asking questions, and I think this is something that is definitely pertinent to having you two on tonight. But Kevin asks, bourbon is a sophisticated drink, unlike vodka. Bourbon, in my opinion, has suffered under the image of old man's drink. What kind of image makeover does bourbon need to make it more of a woman's drink or women's drink, not just for the guys? We had a couple of episodes not too long ago where we had a woman from Amy, who owns an Irish pub, McClellan's, here in Columbus, and she is definitely a bourbon girl and great bar owner, great person. And then the following week, I think it was in that order, we had Laurel, who is a brand ambassador for Macanudo Cigars, and we kind of did a 2-part episode or 2-part series, right, with women kind of in the whiskey world and then in the cigar world. And so I think, answer that question, or what are your thoughts on that question? With you guys, you speak about the Bourbon and Blondes as part of empowerment, right, in general, but when it comes to whiskey, that too.
It's hard because forever it's been like an old boys club. When you talk about bourbon and whiskey, you picture like mahogany lined walls and leather sofas and just like a bunch of dudes in suits after work, like hanging out, sipping on bourbon. Well, I think our goal when it comes to making bourbon more of a women's drink is just being able to initiate the conversation. Women are, let me rephrase that, more often than not, women are very intimidated to ask questions about a spirit, neat, on the rocks, anything. They're like, oh, well, this person in my life is like super into it. I'm trying to get into it, but like, I don't know how to have that conversation. So I think the first step, I don't know if it's bourbon industry or it's just like conversation like we're having now. You just have to start very simple. Like, okay, well, what do you like? Do you like spicy? Do you like sweet? Do you like something flavorful? Do you like it really hot? Like, what are you interested in? And a lot of times they're like, I don't know. I'm like, okay, well, what do you eat? What is your favorite meal? And then you can start there. It's a very basic flavor profile. If it's steak, if it's tacos, you can always kind of gather like their mentality. If you talk about food and you're like, okay, well, I would start with these very simple sipping things. If you want to make it easy, start with rock. So I don't know if it's necessarily a bourbon industry makeover or if it's just like a day-to-day conversation. Just talk about it, make people more comfortable. It's not this, oh, you have to drink this $130 bottle of bourbon because it's like the best. Start with a $20 bottle and see what happens. You're going to hate half the stuff you try. You just got to start talking about it.
Yeah. Alaina?
No, I agree. I think a lot of times so I'll use wine, for example, like you have a Chardonnay and you know that you like a Chardonnay and you're like, okay, I'll just order a Chardonnay while I'm out because that's what I like. And maybe you don't like all of the same Chardonnays because they're so different, right? The same as any other liquor is, or beer for that matter.
Yeah.
And I think women oftentimes, like Abby said, are intimidated or not willing to have a conversation about something that they're not knowledgeable about. And so I think what we try to do is say, hey, we don't know everything. Like, I mean, me and you both, despite being in and out of the industry, like we're not bartenders. I mean, we're not experts by any means. And so let's just all have like an honest conversation about what we like and what I think there's a lot of guilt too. And when I say that I like, you know, what we're drinking, this Old Ezra, and a woman would be like, well, maybe intimidated or not able to say, well, I don't really like that. But it's also, how do we articulate that? And like you said, that's probably my favorite part of the conversation. I had a girl that I met when I was in a festival in Arizona, and she's like, I just drink White Claws and vodka, and that's what I like. And most people maybe would turn their nose up and be like, oh, well, you know, whatever. But I was like, okay, well, what do you like about them? Like, what are your favorite flavors? And so I ended up suggesting a whiskey drink that had a lot of cherries in it, a lot of sweetness. Like, you obviously like a lot of sweetness in your drinks because you're drinking that, but do you like some carbonation? Okay, well, maybe try something with a, you know, Prosecco topper or something like that. So it's, that's probably one of my favorite parts of the conversation, is going through and seeing what you do like, talking about food, talking about different flavors, or what are you drinking? Oh, well, I like a vodka and cranberry. Well, is that because that's what you've been drinking since college? And there's nothing wrong with it, but let's try something different. Like, yeah. If you like cranberry, okay, well, do you like something a little like tart? Okay, we can figure out something tart to put in with a bourbon or whiskey.
A dry finish, yeah.
Well, I think sometimes too, you know, if say you are at a bar, or you're at an event or whatever it might be, and they say something like a vodka and cranberry, right? Splash of soda, whatever. All right, let's start with a whiskey cocktail. You know, let's talk. And if you're at a bar that has a great bartender, or if you have a couple cocktails that you really enjoy that have a little more sweetness, a little more fruit to it or whatever, you can always, I mean, that's sometimes the way it works. I think back in the day, that was why the old fashioned was created, because whiskey sales were losing to the clear spirits. And so now you fast forward and now it's a trend, but yeah, it's definitely difficult to dip your toe in the water, but maybe sometimes a cocktail will get you in that. And then it's like, all right, now, you know, next time let's try that whiskey, a sweeter whiskey, a bourbon, whatever, maybe with an ice cube or two or a little splash of water, see what you think. And I think, you know, it's just like a lot of the bourbon drinkers, cigar smokers, I feel the mild or the lighter flavors are typically the gateway into something like a new hobby. You start light, you know, any hobby. You're going to go in a little bit. There's some people that'll just be like, no, I want to go full blow. You know, I'm going to jump off this plane right now. I'm going to skydive. I'm going to jump off this cliff. I'm going to, you know, hike the hardest trail. You go skiing for the first time. You skip the bunny hills and you're like, all right, so what does this, you know, double black diamond thing mean? And
that's
like, well, it means put a helmet on. And so I think that
hope your insurance is paid for.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. What's your health insurance / life insurance? But I think that, you know, with whiskeys, I think that those are great points. I mean, you get to know someone and there's a question sometimes in the cigar industry that, you know, you ask the question, well, why do you don't smoke cigars? Why'd you want to try a cigar? You really go down to the core of it. Like what brings you into this? Why are you wanting to try whiskey? And then you find out why. It's like, oh, well, my friend drinks whiskey a lot and I just never tried it. And I'm the intimidation factor's there, or I hang out with friends or I'm at a bar and I see all these people drinking these really fancy, you talk about like, the mahogany and the leather sofas, all this stuff, like I just don't know where to start and I feel stupid, right? I don't want to ask questions and look a certain way. I think you guys make great points is that, ask those questions. There's no, I think, humility there that, can't overcome those initial questions, because if you're asking a question, especially when it comes down to the basic side of it, when you're entering into an interest that turns into maybe a hobby, you have that much interest, there's got to be the right people to talk to, and if someone looks at you down their nose or scoffs or be like, I really don't want to have to explain this, you're talking to the wrong person, whether you know them well or not.
For sure.
Fuck them 100%. And go on to the next person and ask the same question because someone's going to have a good conversation with you.
Find a whiskey bar. This is how I started. I found a whiskey bar 2 blocks from where I live in the city of St. Louis. I walked in, I sat down there like, what are you drinking? I go, whatever you pour, but whatever you pour me, you have to tell me about it. And you have to tell me like a funny story that you know about like the brand or the distillery or whatever. And that was probably like 5 or 6 years ago now. And it's just developed into this thing. I've got weird little anecdotes about things I've had because of the bartenders. I was like, if you pour me something, I'll pay for it. You just got to tell me about it. And they just kind of looked at me like, are you serious? I'm like, yeah, I don't know what I'm doing. I want to figure it out.
Yeah.
Hopefully the bar's not super busy.
Right. No, and usually whiskey bars, I feel like if you go on a weeknight or like daytime on the weekends, it's pretty quiet at the bar because a lot of people are eating. So,
Yeah, no, you're right. Alaina, what were you going to say?
No, to your point, like 100%. I say this all the time, whether it's talking about bourbon or really anything that you have a hobby in life. If you talk about that to somebody and they put their nose up or they try to put you down, you have to realize they're talking with their ego probably. And second thing is they're not your people. Like people that aren't willing to have the conversation or to educate, then they're not, they're not your jam. They're not your peeps.
Well, some of those questions that you ladies are talking about asking, I think what plays a huge role is how the person responds to that question. Like Steven alluded to earlier, if someone comes into the shop and they're just getting into cigars and they ask a question and you're like, oh gosh, I don't want to have this conversation, like that comes across and that can turn that person away from that industry. So, if they come up to you and like, hey, I'm thinking about trying bourbon, I don't know what I like, and you're like, I have to do bourbon 101 with someone, shit. But if you sit there and say, you know what, I would love to tell you as much as you want to know. As much as you want to know, I will tell you whatever you want to know, whatever helps you enjoy the experience. That how that question is answered, I think, plays a huge role in whether or not that person comes back and stays with it.
Big time. And you can tell if you're passionate about it or not. Like if you ask somebody a question about bourbon or cigars and they're like, oh, you're not going to like that, and like move on, you're going to ruin that person. And they can tell like you don't care, that you're just going to tell them what you like. Whereas like if they come up to me or Alaina, we're always like, oh, wow, well, what do you like? What do you want to know? Like, let's talk about it. And I think that makes a big difference.
I think there's times too, that there is a level sometimes of judgment too, as you get into a hobby like bourbon, for example. Beer's the same way. I think the craft brew industry kind of had a head start on the bourbon boom. Yeah, and I remember being in World of Beer near our shop. And, I did the whole 50 beers and, got the t-shirt and all that stuff. And was just like, yeah, whatever, like I like this, I like that. And they're like, well, we already had these and all this stuff. I didn't really like IPAs. And I was like, well, just give me an IPA because I just needed to have another beer on here. Just having fun with friends and all that stuff. And when I got back to it, it was just like, I got to the point where we had friends and it was close to the shop. And I just started making sure they had Miller Lite, cans. And, the story that was so funny to me is the judgment of people when you're in a bar called World of Beer. And they're like, "Do you want a glass?" I was like, "No, I'm fine with the can. I'm proud of what I'm drinking. Not really proud, but I'm fine with it." And,
you have to tell that story, Steve.
Well, yeah. So the funny story is that so I was in there with my buddy Brandon. We're sitting there, by the door, just kind of hanging out by ourselves. And this girl walks from halfway down the bar, starts walking towards us, and just kind of noticed out of the corner of my eye that we're the only two in that part of the bar. Almost there, literally, she just like takes a left and just like, all right, maybe the light was worse when she got closer. I don't know. That's fine. Wasn't really interested or looking or anything like that. About 20 minutes later, this guy comes up to me, like he had just gone to the bathroom, whatever. He's like circling back around, and he's like, "Hey, I just want to let you know that my friend over there, she was going to come over and talk to you, and then she saw you were drinking a Miller Lite, and she just decided that you weren't her type of guy." And I was like, "Well, she's not my type of girl, so that worked out for everyone." But I think there's a lot of like, if you get into these things, if you know what you like, and whiskey's the same way, there's going to be those people. You got to find someone that like Abby, you say you find a bartender, and you keep going back. And I think the bartender profession is fantastic. It's getting bigger and bigger again because there's a level of trust there. There was a time where the bartender was a very respected profession. And I think we're getting back to that to some social circles. But you find someone that is willing to talk to you about it. When you find someone just sitting at the bar, you don't want someone that scoffs you away. You also don't want someone to just try to like talk down to you and say, "Oh, you should try these. These are easy drinking." You find someone that has a happy medium that likes to talk about themselves and talk about what they like. And then you put a filter on and you just kind of listen to it all. And you're like, okay, I got all of it. And I really got about 40% of that. And that's all I really needed. But while they're talking about themselves, you're just sipping and trying new whiskeys.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it's part of what I want to do. I've done a cocktail class before. So when I used to bartend, I worked at an airport bar, and it was, it was all
Why is that funny, Abby?
The jobs that Alaina has had, they always make me laugh.
Because happy hours at 9 a.m.
Right, it was a bartender at a bar where you had the 6 a.m. shift. Like, what are we doing?
I was also working illegally there too. I just do a lot of illegal activities. That's it. I was 20 years old, and I was.
You know what I mean?
That's why she's laughing, because I worked at a casino when I was 16. Like, I just worked a lot of very weird jobs.
Were you a dealer, or what were you?
No, so I worked at a nightclub of all places. That was at one of the casinos in town, and I couldn't open anything until you're 18, so you can't get behind the bar and you can't open. But I was just cleaning tables off, and I worked back of the house too. It was a very interesting experience as a 16-year-old. Let me tell you. Actually, I think we were talking about something. It reminded me of spilling. I think on the part one, talked about knocking into a table and spilling something. I had a very interesting. Yes, I one time very early on accidentally spilled ranch dressing at a nightclub on a Friday night on a guy's pants.
Who orders ranch dressing at a nightclub?
I may have ordered a salad
at a nightclub. You're not eating.
I've never been to a nightclub.
It was like before it got nightclub. So the front was the nightclub, and then like they had still dinner service. But totally solid parenting is totally. That's probably why I dropped out of high school.
There it is. We are learning a lot tonight, everyone. Check out Bourbon and Blondes podcast if you want to know more. Don't let your 16-year-old work at a nightclub. Don't do that.
Make sure they continue high school.
So go back to your airport bar story, if you remember.
Ooh, yeah. Oh yeah. So I was working. I think I've got bad ADHD, so I was working like mostly mixed drinks and stuff. But it wasn't until like the last few years that I tried to get into the understanding the mixing, like the difference between stirring and shaking a cocktail, like very basics. But once you start understanding that and appreciating, even at a very high level, it doesn't take could even take an hour-long class to understand the complete basics. I think you start to appreciate what goes into making a cocktail. And I think all the years that maybe I had got, I mean, there's definitely good and bad bartenders like in any industry,
Sure.
but I think I would have appreciated cocktails and the taste for the how they were prepared and brought to me if I understood the process. So I think that's a part of the education piece too, of knowing how things should be made properly at a high level to really appreciate like what you like and how to approach it.
No, absolutely. I think with cocktails, just to touch on that point, I think there is a level, you know, that old school stereotype with some like dive bars, right, where they have bottles of booze, whatever it is, whiskey, vodka was one, and they're basically pouring water, or they're like watering the stuff down to cover liquor costs. I think it puts a bad name on that type of thing. But when it comes to cocktails and the good whiskeys, it's not always going to be the cheapest. Sometimes you have to pay for going to a bar and for the atmosphere, the ambiance, and also they're charging accordingly. You know, if there's that level of interest that you're getting into it, it's like a bottle of wine. You know, you can buy it at the store for $13 and you buy it, you know, with your dinner and it's $35, and you're like, well, I can get the same. Well, you're at a restaurant, you know, yeah. So there is that part of it. I think with hobbies, initially, to go back to that, it's for me with whiskeys in a sense, I think everyone tackles these things differently, and there's that intimidation factor where you feel like if you start getting interested in it, you're asking questions, and you find out that people are just 110% dialed in, and their knowledge. I mean, you guys run your podcast, and I've listened. It's part of it is that journey, right? It's learning about it. You don't have to be the highest level expert, but you can enjoy talking to those people that are into it. But for me, it's like with whiskeys, I don't think I will ever get to the point where I'm the one that will be a source. For friends, sure, I'm the source where it's like, hey, what do you think is good and all this stuff, and hey, what would you go well with this food, or I'm looking to try some. I can give you that advice, but I'm not going to be able to rattle off 3 paragraphs of a blog that this is why you should like it. This is where it comes from. This is why, why it tastes the way it does. This is the mash bill and all that stuff. And we have friends. Nate's a little bit better at retaining that information than I am. Dustin, who is a part of the podcast that's been chiming in, he like the retention level and the interest level is there. But for me, it's more of, I enjoy the hobby. It is flirting with a lifestyle for me. And that doesn't just mean the drinking, but it's typical daily conversations. It's something that has I don't have the biggest whiskey collection like a lot of our listeners do. I would love to have that, but I'm the other side of it. My hobby / lifestyle of whiskey drinking, and this goes with a lot of my hobbies, is I'm never going to be like that number one sought after source, but it becomes more of a lifestyle for me because now this is a part of my day to day. Drinking whiskeys, enjoying whiskeys, cocktails, cigars. I mean, it's a career. It's turned into a career for me with cigars, but I'm still not going to be the one that knows everything just off the top of my head. When we look at, on the retail side and someone asks me a question, it's like, hey, what binder leaf is on this cigar? And I'm like, yeah, I can look it up anymore. Like you can't, it's not like an insulting question, but I'm like, I'm not the guy. I can tell you based on what you like. And if you're looking for what you're, medium or full, or you like this type of tobacco, I can tell you that stuff. But if you want to know what farm this came from and what lot, I'm not your guy. But I don't think you have to be, I guess is my point. You don't necessarily have to dive in and be intimidated about getting into a hobby or something like whiskey, cigars, working out, skydiving. Well, you should know a lot about skydiving.
or be in tandem with somebody who knows enough to not,
There are certain things that you need to be an expert on before you, metaphorically or literally jump out of the plane. But there are things where you got to know yourself and what you want to get out of it, and how it fits into your life and your personality.
And I think the best advice I've ever gotten from somebody in the bourbon industry, I was having a conversation with Steve Beam, who is numero uno at Limestone Distillery. They're making Yellowstone and all kinds of stuff. I was at a tasting. He was there, and I asked him, I was like, bourbon, it's in your blood. Literally, you're a Beam. Like, this is your life. But what advice would you give people who have questions and aren't sure? And he's like, bourbon is 50% your life experience. So if someone tells you're supposed to taste caramel and oak and you don't taste that and you taste something else, say it. Have that conversation. This is your life impacting your taste and your decisions, and your hobbies are impacted by like your life experiences. So it's, you got to try something new, and it's not going to match everybody else because everybody's different, and it's exciting. That's why people make bourbon.
Yeah. Well, and the other part of that is if you sit there and if you're someone who knows or gets a lot of those different tasting notes out of a whiskey or out of a cigar, because Steve knows there's one publication that every week they do a featured cigar and they list the tasting notes that they get, and some of them are just absolutely ridiculous. But if you sit,
in yours, in my opinion, but not that one.
If you sit there and you tell someone like, hey, this has notes of apricot and cinnamon and all this other stuff, and that person drinks it or smokes it and they don't get those notes, then they're like, oh, I guess I'm just not enjoying this as much as other people, and maybe this isn't for me. Like, too much knowledge, too much detail can hinder some people.
Well, nobody's wrong. It's your taste. Your taste
True.
buds are not going to match mine, so everybody's going to experience it in a different way.
Point.
And you're just not wrong. Like we got tasting notes and nose notes on everything we feature on our podcast, and sometimes I'm like, I don't get that. I don't taste it. I don't smell it. I smell these things more, and it's not wrong. It's just different.
Mm-hmm.
And we say that when starting like a hobby, a business, or anything, don't go into it like you want. I mean, you can be an area expert on anything, but people are coming to you specifically, whether it's your podcast, your blog, I don't know, your Facebook post, because they like you and they like your opinion, and either you're a trusted source or they can relate to you. So don't try to be somebody else. Like in your opinions or your thoughts, just be authentic, because people will appreciate authenticity and vulnerability before anything else, because they can relate to it.
No, that's a great point as well. And I gotta say, you're gonna know more than a lot of people, but I mean, you gotta keep being that sponge, right? I mean, again, we brought up Eddie Russell earlier. I did, and he'd probably be the first one. I mean, yeah, he's 30 some years into the industry, and heading right now, as far as the company goes, one of the most well-known American whiskey companies. And what I learned from him, just like as a person, he seemed to be the one that he knows what he knows, but he's not done learning yet. And I think that's a big part of it, is that, again, hobby, lifestyle, whatever you want to call it, I think your interest, you got to keep asking questions. You can't look at it as more than everyone else, because I mean, it's just going to short sight you. I mean, that's just really, you're selling yourself short, and you're not going to keep learning. And if you do have a hobby, whether it be a hobby or I keep going back with the topic, a lifestyle, is that even if it is your day to day, you're not done learning. You have to, and even if someone doesn't have the experience that you have, I find that, and this is a great way to talk about it on a podcast like this with whiskey and cigars. I'm going to learn from someone that literally has been, drinking whiskey or just getting into it, or has been smoking cigars for 6 months, that has just been diving into it and reading everything they can. And they're really passionate about it. And I can guarantee 100% they will know something that I do not know. But if I look at it as something like, man, I've been in this industry for, I've been smoking for over a decade. I've been working in the industry for 7+ years. You're asking me questions, bro. I all right, stop wasting my time. Like that person that you ask those questions about, you have a conversation. That's the biggest part of it.
Yeah, I agree.
What other hobbies do you guys have, or lifestyle categories would you categorize, in your everyday personality / life?
I'll go first. So if you couldn't tell by my crazy travel stories, travel is my jam. It's my one true passion. It's my one true love. Like even over the years, I thought like I'd get older and I'd get into my 30s and then I'll just like get disinterested with it. But I mean, you could ask me about it. I mean, when I was listening to some of your prior podcasts, what excited me the most was hearing these stories of people traveling in other countries and their experience. I mean, even your experience with being in Cuba, that's what lights my fire, I guess you could say. Yeah. And so that's probably, I mean, that's the biggest thing for me. Like, if you throw a country at me, I'll spit out. Like, another one of my favorite things we were talking about, like discussing a cocktail or like what flavor profiles you like with things. I feel the same way about if you were to tell me you wanted to go on vacation and you had like $1,000 to spend and you wanted a beach and you wanted this and that, and these were your preferences. I mean, I absolutely love talking about that, being like, well, I think you should maybe go here, and here, like based on what you like and your price point and, you know, whatever your main points of what you want to travel or what you're trying to do. And so I would say that's probably my favorite thing. And then
so would you classify on that point, would you classify travel as a hobby or a lifestyle?
Both.
Yeah. It's probably,
I mean, listen to her talk about it. It's both. It falls into both categories. She's passionate about it. She does it. She talks to people about it. She basically did my whole trip to Ireland that I took. She's like, oh, you should do these things and talk to these people. And you can answer your own question. But
no, I think you covered it, Abby. I think you.
I love hearing that, though. No, I 100% agree. So I've been to 41 countries, and I think that
that's a lot.
I thought at a certain point I'd just be like, well, at a certain point I did stop like counting, and I started going back to places that I've been before. And there's places that I love more than others, but it's definitely I don't know, it's definitely a lifestyle and a hobby and in that. And
to me, it sounds like a lifestyle. You know what I mean? Like it's a hobby, but I mean, I don't know. I look at that. I'm not trying to like over define these things, but I mean, that's the whole topic, is that there's a line that you can cross, you know, but I think when it's a lifestyle type of a thing, it consumes you. I mean, it's something better or worse. It doesn't have to be necessarily your career. I mean, there's always that conversation where we both, you know, do our own respective podcasts, and there's like entrepreneurism is always like one of the hottest, you know, podcasts as far as ratings on all of the things. And there's good ones. There's ones that you really like. There's ones that you don't like. But one of the best things that I like about some of the ones I listen to are the fact that when it comes to that mindset, so again, like the lifestyle mindset, it's just like the entrepreneur mindset, is that you don't necessarily have to own your own business. You don't have to necessarily, you know, be the CEO. That's not what being an entrepreneur mindset is. I find that, you know, when I listen to some of these people talk, is that they, you know, no matter what you do, it's about, you know, controlling, you know, your vocation, what you're doing for a living, and also what you do outside of your career. That's that mindset. So I feel like that's the whole thing with the lifestyle part of it, is that it's not just a passive hobby that you're just kind of dabbling in. This is something now that, you know, when you are maybe at work or on your weekends and, you know, you should be doing something else, I feel like it's something that you may want. This is what's always on your mind. This is like, when is the next trip? Where am I going next? And someone asks you a question, you're like, all right, how much time do you have? Because I need to talk to you about what you're asking me. And it's not going to be short.
Yeah.
That's what I'm envisioning when you're talking about this.
Yeah. And can you hear me okay? Because I switched over to the computer mic. Okay, perfect. My AirPods went dead, and I was like looking for them, and I was like, I'm doing it. But
technology.
you know, this is something where, and we talk about this a little bit in the podcast, and I think we try to touch on it, is a lot of people feel very lost. And I think we've been structured to take a corporate job, for example, and to like, because it's a lot of security, and let's like take this job that feels secure and let's keep on moving with it. And a lot of people our generation especially are kind of like exploring different ways of being an entrepreneur, and how can we not just work for somebody else for the rest of my life. And if you do want to work for somebody else for the rest of your life and have that like security in life, that's definitely meant for a lot of people. But I mean, I think that when when somebody's thinking, okay, like, what should I do? Like with my life, what should I think about? And you tell somebody, especially somebody who doesn't know you very well, and this has come up a lot in my like coaching and stuff with other people. They're like, tell me about yourself. And then I start telling them, and I find that either travel or just interacting with people on a one-to-one basis, whether it's, you know, podcasting or customer service, like side of things, always comes up and they see your face light up. It's something you don't see in yourself, but other people see in you. And I think, like you said, that's what, you know, is the difference between a passion, a hobby, and what your lifestyle, what your purpose is to be, and how you can, you know, convert that into your life, whether that's full time or that's sharing it with other people.
Yeah. Abby, what do you think? I mean, so a lot of times I think, you know, lifestyle, people, you know, in the day and age of social media, right? Like lifestyle, when we're talking about like entrepreneurship and all that, you know, kind of bullshit stuff where people are, they get dogged about like they're renting like cars, and they're like, you know, having these certain clothes that they can't really afford, or, you know, you go even to a higher level. It's like this,
the influencer mentality, the appearance situation.
That's exactly it. I mean, I think that, I think, you know, when it comes to lifestyle, people will look at lifestyle. You have to have, you're portraying an image, you know, and whiskey and cigars, like we're talking about, you know, we're familiar with, is the same thing. You can have that, is that you have to, again, be an expert. You have to smoke everything. You got to post everything you're smoking or drinking. I think the true joy in that is the communication. That's how, you know, we all kind of hooked up here, is that through social media, you can have and meet new people. You can have connections and meet new people, and it's broadened the scope, and everyone's kind of got that lifestyle in a sense, but it doesn't mean you have to be, you know, I can afford these bottles. I can, you know, smoke this in my fancy car, or, you know, my patio is basically like a vacation home. It's like, good for you. But if you're going broke trying to just show off your quote lifestyle, it's not really a lifestyle. You're just breaking yourself over your own knee, in my opinion. I mean, what do you think, Abby?
You know, if what you have in a material sense, like the car, the house, that you drink these $30 cigars and you only drink Pappy, or you smoke these cigars, whatever. There's not a lot I'm going to be able to talk to you about, because that's not how I live my life. I live my life on being able to connect with people and talk to them about day-to-day experiences. I live in an apartment. I drive a Jeep Wrangler. My life is very simple. So if you're like boasting about how you drink these fancy things, and I tell you I don't drink them, and that's like where the conversation dies. Whereas like you guys are like, oh my God, wait, you're doing this. You're talking about bourbon and women and whiskey and women and all these things. I think the internet is both a blessing and curse, I guess, maybe social media, I should say. You know, I don't know. Lifestyles and hobbies, they can suck you dry if you don't balance them out, I guess, is how I would phrase it.
But I've met a lot of good people, especially in the bourbon industry. I'll say cigar the same way, but that they have those wild, just ridiculous collections, and they are posting, they're hosting like bourbon meetups and
like trades and whatever.
What's that?
Like where they're like, bring your most expensive bottle and we'll do trades and things like that.
Yeah, I was going to some bourbon meetups, and it's a good friend of mine, and he invited me, and I was still getting into it and all that stuff, and I still remember the meetup where they had progressed, and I remember earlier on it was like certain bottles that it was before like the state picks or the barrel picks or the store picks, before the super rare stuff were like really like just that it turned into their lifestyle.
Yep.
I remember going to one of these things, and I'm smoking a cigar and hanging out, talking to people I know, talking to some other people, and everyone's cool. But I brought a bottle of it was just E.H. Taylor small batch, and at the time, that was one that like I felt super fortunate to come across because it was super tough to get for me in Ohio.
Yeah.
I remember putting it on the share table, and I'm standing there like looking around at other stuff, and someone's like, "Oh, have you tried this?" I was like, "No, I don't want. That's got to be really tough to find. I don't want to do that." He's like, "That's what's on the share table." At the end of the night, the E.H. Taylor small batch had not even been cracked, and I'm just like looking at it. I'm like, Because I remember one time I was standing and someone's talking to me about that. He didn't know I brought it, and he did not mean any offense by it. But he literally was like, "Oh yeah," and then you see someone brought the small batch. I've got like 18 bottles of that. I was like, "Well, that's cool, man."
One.
At the end of the night, I had one bottle left because I just took it home.
I had something like that happen.
I mean, but again, it's if there's no judgment, it's fine because everyone's at a different level of this stuff. It doesn't mean that everyone's got the income or whatever to spend on these just radical bottles that are just stupid money. Secondary market, we had Eric Espinosa bring on a bottle of old Rip Van Winkle 10, and that's retail $60, and secondary is like $400 to $500 at the time. And by the end of the night, that bottle was gone in the garage because everyone was just drinking out of it. And it's like that's what it was. It was great.
Don't leave bourbon on the shelf unopened, not drinking it. My opinion of bourbon, no matter what bottle it is, maybe there's some you save for more special occasions, but that's meant to be shared with friends, with people. You're supposed to drink it. That's why they make it.
Yeah.
Nate, did you have something? I felt like you wanted to say something there.
Well, so last year, my wife works at OSU at the medical center, and her lab was having a white elephant exchange, and it was bring a 6-pack of beer, bring a bottle of wine, or a bottle of bourbon, and they'll do white elephant style. And I'm in the back of my mind, I'm sitting there going, okay, there's going to be a bunch of doctors and all these other people there. Like, I'm just going to go simple. I'm going to take a bottle of Elijah Craig. That's it. $28 bottle. I'm just going to put that out there, because that's my lifestyle. I love that bottle, but I'm going to at least bring something. And then I noticed like everyone was bringing like $8 6-packs and $10 bottles of wine, and they're all putting them on the table. And before the thing started, I had my wife go back to the table and take our bottle back because it was obvious that I was the biggest spender of that entire group with a $28 bottle of Elijah Craig. And I'm like, I'm in the wrong crowd for this because I don't think there's anyone here who's really going to appreciate that. And it was at a really nice whiskey bar that's got one of the greatest whiskey selections in the state of in Central Ohio. It's an absolutely fantastic whiskey bar. And I'm like, really? Like, okay, like, no, I'm out. You
should have left it just for, just someone would have been just absolutely blessed to have that.
No, the funniest part was, she brought it back and I'm like, nope, I'm going to stick that right on the table. So that way people, know, like, yep, I'm just going to leave it right here. I'm not hiding it. I'm going to put it right on the table. And people are like, wait a minute, how'd you get that? Where was that on the table? I'm like, it wasn't on the table. I took it off the table because obviously no one else here is going to appreciate it. So I'm just going to, but I ended up buying a couple people, a couple different whiskeys that night because they weren't really into it. Wasn't a whiskey crowd. That was my mistake. I made the mistake thinking it was going to be a whiskey crowd. It was not a whiskey crowd whatsoever. It was a craft beer crowd.
Jonathan Herring says, shitty move, Nate, just so you know, that's out there.
Yeah, I know. I know. That's fine.
Side story. I've told this story before. That reminds me of a recent Valentine's Day with Liz, and Nate knows the story, but it was our first Valentine's Day together, and she liked PBR at the time, and so I didn't know what to get her for Valentine's Day. So I got a dozen roses and a case of PBR, and I was at the checkout at our local grocery store, self-checkout, and there was a lady with her daughter. She looks over to me. This was literally on February 14th. She looks over. She's like, oh, that looks like a nice Valentine's Day. It's like, you have no idea. I think she's really going to like this. And she's like, I know I would. And I'm like,
oh, wait, it gets better. The story.
And then we walk out, and it's like, her and her daughter, a teenage daughter, like they're getting in this like high-end like Range Rover and everything. I'm just like thinking, I'm like, you poor thing, man. I feel like your Valentine's Day is not going to be fulfilling as soon as you get home. You would rather have a PBR than whatever you're going to get. But it's all relative. But
it is.
How do you guys balance? So I'm going to ask this question, as we get into this here towards the second part of here, part two. But how do you guys balance the lifestyle? You like, Abby, you've got this career that you say that obviously you have a passion or interest for.
Mm-hmm.
But when you talk to people, you immediately go to your hobbies or your lifestyle. Like, how do you balance that? I think that's the biggest challenge for a lot of people is is how do you? So whiskey is one of them, right? So if you have a 8 to 5, 9 to 5, those don't really exist. If you have like a 7 to 6 job, right? And bourbon is a passion that now is turning into a lifestyle. How do you balance the whole family or relationships, the career, the hobby that's turned into a lifestyle that is now consuming you a little bit more in your mind? I mean, the balance part of it, we talk about on the podcast, especially in part 2 a lot, is balance in life. When we talk about hobby versus lifestyle or lifestyle, I think that's a challenge that a lot of people deal with, is that you don't know how far into the matrix do you go with your hobby turning into a lifestyle.
That's the question, isn't it? I think balance is definitely not my strength. I am all in or I'm zero. Like I'm not good at the middle, like gray. People say life is in the gray. It's black or white. Like there's no middle ground. There's no balance. So oftentimes I don't sleep, and for me, it's what is most important that day. Okay, so today I had work and this podcasting at night. So relationship and family took a back seat. Tomorrow I have work and the podcasting, but the podcasting is going to be less. So maybe I go out to dinner with friends, family, relationship, whatever. I don't know. It's day by day for me. Balance is, I don't like that word.
You don't like it because you struggle with it, or you don't like it because you feel like it is such a challenge?
Both. I think balance is important, but I also think that we focus on certain things so much at one time that you need people around you who are like, hey, wait a minute, what about going to visit mom and dad in Wisconsin? What about going out to dinner with friends instead of going on a date, kind of thing? My friends are my balance. They're like, you're working too much. Can you please just stop for a second? Okay, yeah, that's fine. What do you want to do? I don't know.
We had Josh Bentley, who is with Altadis, one of our sponsors and a friend of ours, he talked about his own personal board of directors. Is when he has a challenge in life, or if he finds himself struggling with a decision or just everyday life, is that he has this personal board of directors, and it's some family members, it's mentors, it's people that he respects in different industries and different aspects of his life that he actually will lean on when he is struggling with the balance or a tough decision, or how this interest or this decision is going to affect other parts of his life. And I think that, like you said, that kind of the same thing. You have friends, you have a circle of people around you that will put you in check. And I think that's a pretty powerful takeaway, that when you're getting into hobbies or lifestyle changes and stuff like that, and the rest of life is not stopping, that you do have to actually maybe take a step back, and you might have to actually not realize that you have to realize that you aren't the one to make the decision just by yourself. Everyone looks internally, but sometimes you just start spiraling internally. So you have to actually look at your circle of friends, your board of directors, or whatever it might be.
Right. And it's hard now because everything is in your face on social media. So you're like, oh my God, these people are doing all of these exciting things. I need to leave these parts of my life behind and focus on that because it's right there in front of you. But that's not the reality. So to be able to have that group of people, family, friends, whoever, board of directors you nominate.
Yeah.
It's tough. It's not easy. And it's a very fast paced world. So
what about you, Alaina? How about you? How do you find that balance?
Yeah,
because you have how many careers? Like before we went live, it's like, so what do you do? And you're like, oh well, and you just rattle off like I think it was like 6 things. And maybe I'm selling you short on that, but
no, not at all. I think that a lot of times, like from a society perspective, we've always been shamed for having our hand in a lot of different things. Like like if you were to tell somebody like that I do these 5 things, even as a career, people would be like, oh, you don't focus on one thing? Like, but it's totally okay to pivot and have so many different interests. I mean, like just in this whole quarantine, I'll tell you, I refinished a table, refinished a table. I started gardening. I literally have the brownest thumb ever. I bought like $400 worth of plants that I'm probably going to kill before this quarantine's over. I mean, I started working on our website. I'm trying to do my own travel writing thing. Like, and it's totally okay to be that's like what we coin is all over the place. And I laughed while you asked Abby that question because we both definitely struggle with balance in our own way. And what's actually the beauty of going, I guess you could say, into business with somebody who balances you really well. We've been learning on how to like communicate with each other. And when she gets stressed or I get stressed, because we both like are a bit the same reaction when it comes to stress. We're just like, oh my God, like what am I, like running around with a chicken with her head the same way.
Your high voice. Yeah.
It's like the beauty of trying to see when the other person is acting like that and being like, how can I help and how can I balance that out and be there for them? And, and everyone's different in their needs for that. So I definitely do not have it down to.
Not many people do. Just to speak for the masses, not many people do.
Yeah.
Balance is always the biggest struggle, I feel like.
I try
retirement.
Yeah, I'm somebody who gets very overwhelmed when I think of my to-do list at any part of the day. And so I try to like write down what's important to me right then. And then I stop trying to like guilt shame myself for not getting certain things done at the end of the day. And just, I mean, it's like a level of forgiveness for yourself of being like, like the world doesn't stop when you don't get a project done, whether it's for work or for personal. Like it's fine. Like just forgive yourself and start again the next day and just keep it moving. I mean, it's an internal struggle. I mean, I do yoga, meditation. I do a lot of stuff that seems like it never helps.
It does for the moment, but you're still thinking about the other things while you're doing yoga, I'm sure.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, they talk about meditating and they're like, just be one with, they talk about like imagining like an orb colored thing. And I'm just like imagining what I'm drinking later that night. I'm just like, how can you imagine this like orb thing going throughout? Anyway.
It's like a brown whiskey shade orb.
Yeah.
You're seeing a floating bottle with a nice light behind it.
A glass, not an orb.
But
right.
I just think it's being honest with yourself and having the community of people that you try to be honest and vulnerable with to tell them what's going on. Because if you have like no one to download that with whether it's family or therapist or friends or whatever, it's a lot to take on. Like it's just a lot to hold on to. So
have you guys had any so going back to our common interest here with whiskey and cigars for Nate and I, and you guys are interested in cigars. I found as I made a shift in my life to be in the cigar industry, and Nate brought up my mom earlier when we were talking about the podcast and everything else, and she at some point, my dad smoked cigarettes for years, right, and had not major health issues from that, but it didn't help obviously as he got older. But, it was kind of one of those things that I would never, I was like, growing up, my brother and I was like, I'm never going to smoke cigarettes, all that stuff. Well, fast forward, now I'm working in the cigar industry for a living. And then you have this side project like you guys do with about whiskey. So when, if you had an elevator speech, with someone like, so what do you do for a living? And I tell them, I'm like, I used to smoke cigars, and now I manage a cigar shop, and we have our own cigar brand, and I do a podcast on the side about whiskey and cigars. And I've had many people actually like, so you drink and smoke for a living? And I really can't say no, but to a lot of people, it's, have you had those? And Nate, you're included in this question is, do you have people that when you really go all in on a hobby that turns into a lifestyle? You guys have, doing this Bourbon and Blondes podcast along with everything else. And you guys both have just admitted, just like everyone else, that the balance is tough. Who in your life is telling you like, what are you doing? Like that, you should not be drinking as much as you drink. You should not be don't devote this much money, time, and effort into whatever your hobby. And they're looking at it as like, this is no longer a hobby. You know, again, based on the topic, is like hobby or lifestyle. When you say you're doing a podcast about bourbon, they're like, is it a hobby? Because I feel like you're buying a lot of whiskey and you're drinking a lot.
So much.
And then if you tell someone that you're doing Bourbon and BS podcast tonight, and you're like, so you're smoking in your apartment now? Like, what's happening?
Are open?
Yeah.
Is there an intervention coming, or I mean, what are we dealing with here?
Well,
I can speak to. So I have so many things to say about that. I'm going to keep it quick. But I have a family history of alcoholism that goes deep into my family. And that'll
make it tough. That'll make it real tough.
Yeah. So I have to constantly put myself, you want to talk about balance as well, have to constantly put myself in check of like, when are my behaviors becoming like certain behavior coming self-destructive, or am I soothing over, like, is it a stressful day and I'm going to alcohol because of it? So I try to focus on enjoying bourbon or whatever it is for the sake of enjoying it, especially over other people's company, like, you know, doing the podcast or when we're in a bar, and having a conversation about it, because then it's not so much soothing stress or issues and stuff like that. I have, I love my father, but also ex-alcoholic. He doesn't drink anymore. And he also owned his own business. And so he had a lot of, like, when I would come to him, I love both my parents. They're both the most amazing people ever. My mom both owned her own business as well. And so when I came to them years ago and I wanted to start a photography business, for example, there was a lot of doubt that came up. And I had to realize that a lot of people reflect their own insecurities and their own issues that they've dealt with in their own life onto your dreams and your thoughts and like what you want to do. And so if there's ever concern, I try to like have a conversation about it, because I think, like, especially the people that are closest to you, it's definitely worth having the conversation. But I also have to know that some of the doubt comes from a level of insecurity for what other people dealt with. So I always try to keep in mind other people. And sometimes you don't know where people's comments, if you get it from a stranger, you don't know people's history and trauma and all that. So you don't know where their comments are coming from.
Very good point.
You just have to keep that in mind when making your decision. But you're also an adult, you know, so like you just have to go with your intuition and think what's best and do it. And I think it's like, I think I've gone, and Abby can probably speak to this too. We've had stressful weeks and we've just like probably gone to the bar and got really shit-faced drunk. And it wasn't optimal. Well, especially when hangovers are really terrible in your 30s.
Yeah. No, I turned 40 this year. I know where you're coming from.
Yeah.
Week long.
And I listened to your last podcast. I feel like you introed that as you had a night before that one.
Yeah.
Well, we missed our first interview because we had 2 nights just like it.
Still am scarred from that incident.
It's good that you healed up both physically and mentally.
Yeah.
Alaina dropped one of our friends that weekend. So if that explains.
Dropped a friend?
Yeah, we dropped piggyback right at 4 o'clock in the morning. That's a good idea.
Alaina is our drunk, strong friend.
She's your what?
Our drunk, strong friend. So she gets into like weightlifting competitions after a few drinks.
Strong when drunk.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yep. So she was forcing one of our friends to be carried home on her back at 4 a.m. when we knew we had to be up at 9 to make it to an interview.
A lot of caffeine.
Mm-hmm.
We woke up 3 minutes before we had to leave. We didn't make it, which is why the next day it was even worse, because it was 2 nights out drinking when we actually made it to the interview. It was
rough.
So a better way to say drunk, strong friend is just when the night has progressed to the point that, you know, people are struggling, that Alaina is your supportive friend.
You go in Dr. Jekyll. You go in Dr. Jekyll. You have a couple of these, and you're Mr. Hyde.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily like she's trying to help other people. She's trying to prove her strength.
Both.
Mm-hmm. I still have the video. I might send it to you guys later. You can hear the other person landing on concrete.
You can share it to the community page, Bourbon BS community page out there. Just an intro to people to follow your podcast, get to know you two better. Abby, so same thing with you when people are doubting, because I feel like, like Alaina, you were talking about like the photography part of it. If it's your parents, that is sometimes, it's not just the drinking with the whiskey and all that stuff, right? I appreciate you sharing that, because I think that's definitely it's something that you had to deal with, obviously, is getting into this hobby and all that stuff, and that you have to. There's a self-realization there that for me, I was sharing about the cigarettes and my dad and everything else, and some of the struggles that put on my family at times, and there's history of other things, not necessarily as direct as what you were talking about, but I appreciate you sharing that. But I think when you come into that, photography as a hobby, now you want to make a career, or how far you want to make this lifestyle type of a change. A lot of times it comes from a concern level, right? It's like, well, how are you going to make money from this? Like, how are you going to support yourself? That sounds great that you're going to be a photographer, but for the next six to 24 months, how are you going to put food on the table? So and that's why you have, I assume, 4 to 18 jobs.
Yeah. It's tough it's tough in a lot of industries, but it's tough in the creative industry. And even what we're doing here with the podcast, I mean, we eventually want to, it's a hobby, but we eventually want to grow it. And whether it's educational, I think that's the big thing too, when you go into something like this. That's why I always say, like, just leap in and like figure it out as you go, because what it is today, what it was when we started a little less than a year ago, we've gotten a ton of opportunities and gotten the opportunity to meet. Like, if we just take out the money part aside, we've gotten the opportunity to meet and talk to so many amazing people. And even if we make $0 out of this, not only have we met so many amazing people, we've learned a lot from them. Like, just conversation, just learn about everybody and their experiences. You don't know what little bit you can either provide to someone listening, or you can take away from, I can personally take away from what, you three are talking about. So
yeah, right. Abby, how about you, man? I mean, I was same question, really. Because again, you have your 9 to 5, which is probably not quite the hours that you keep. I'm sure it's more than that. 9 to 5s really don't exist anymore. I mean,
no, you just work till the job's done. I think is more or less now the whole corporate world environment.
Right.
I think that people who know me very well will say, hi, you need to slow down for a few days. Just like relax for a minute, because they can like see certain patterns in behavior, not like bad things or good things. Like, I'll go silent for like 3 days and Alaina will text me and be like, are you okay? What's going on? And same thing with family. It's like my sisters and I, we like know family history and habits and certain things, and it can be bad and destructive. So we just, my sisters and I have a rule. It's like, hey, if you start seeing this thing, you got to speak up and you have to, stop it or interrupt it. But people, I think, know me well enough not to question certain things, because I'm a very like passionate person. Like, if I'm in, I'm in. Like, questions asked. Don't question it. Otherwise, there might be a problem. But I don't know. But I'm also like really passionate about the things I'm passionate about. I'm not going to have a hobby that's going to be destructive per se, I guess. I don't know. Maybe the alcohol thing can get there, but I think I haven't really had those challenging questions asked of me. Everyone who I talk to is like, oh, wow, you're really interested in this. Like, you actually care about more than just like getting drunk kind of thing when it comes to booze. And with career, same thing. It's like, yeah, it can get exhausting from time to time, but they're like, you're passionate about it. You want it to go somewhere. As long as like you're maintaining healthy balance every couple of weeks, you're good.
So you go on those 3-day ghost periods. Is that you recentering? Is that you crashing, or a combination of both, or?
Both, probably.
Yeah.
It depends on what phase of work life I'm in.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a weekend where I just shut off my phone and ignore the whole world and just kind of like reconnect with myself. Sometimes it's like Tuesday through Thursday, I've got 30 things I have to do in an hour and I just like can't handle it. So I just shut out everything.
Yeah, there was a part of my life where it was like, I dreaded my days off because I was so exhausted my past career. And even more so now, but now, learning over the years is that if on a day off, if there's nothing pressing, I absolutely am just not getting anything else done. I am crashing. It's not always because of, we're talking about like, whiskey, cigars, everything. It's just the fact that it's just, I've had those questions. I'm sure you guys have had that. Nate, you guys don't know much about Nate, but it's like, when the cigar shop's open, he's working a full-time job, and then the more hours, the better. In the evenings and weekends, it's just like he's always available. But it's like that will wear people down. And there is a part of, it's not self-reflection necessarily or crashing. I think there's a self-respect there that it's like everyone knows that, vacations, and besides Alaina, there most people, their vacations are few and far between. And I think sometimes you have to take a staycation on a day where you just literally say everything else can take a back seat.
Oh,
I need a
definitely.
day for myself, and don't worry about the fact that you feel like you're not getting something done, because the thing you're getting done is that recentering. It's the self-respect for yourself that you need more sleep. You need to veg out or whatever it might be. I know when people have families and stuff like that, it's not always available, but it's not the end of the world if you need to take a day off.
Yeah, you got to disconnect.
Yeah.
Every once in a while. You really do.
Nate, how about you? How about, like, let's bring you into the conversation here. It's like, with the fact that you do the two parts, you work a full-time job, you're married, you got a place, you got, you at the cigar shop, you've been in the cigar industry, and they don't know that you were in as a traveling rep, but now these days you work full-time, you take all the hours at a cigar shop, which is your passion / hobby / lifestyle. He refers to like Wednesday nights as his night off, but not really, because he's involved in the podcast. And that sometimes even involves him just being over in the garage and not even on the show. But this is like his night that he's still working in a sense, but it's a commitment.
Yeah. Sunday's my day off.
You watch like 8 movies on Sundays.
Yeah. Well, surprisingly well. But no, yeah. So I do work, I do work a regular job. I, put in about 43 hours a week, my regular job. And then, with some of the recent changes at Tinderbox, I put in 27 to 30 hours a week on top of that, up until all the coronavirus stuff happened. We had to shut the shop down. But the reason I do that, it's not because of a money thing. I think I picked it up more from my dad. Just if I'm home from 5 until whenever I go to bed, like I just feel like I'm not accomplishing anything when I'm just sitting at home. I mean, my dad worked as a delivery driver for UPS for almost 30 years, and his day started at 8 a.m. and they ended at 8 to 9 p.m. So he's a worker, and that's how I am. Cigars for me, it started out as a hobby when I was in college, and then I was just going to cigar shop. I had a cigar shop not far from me when I lived on the south end of town, and just going there for events or going there and hanging out. And then all of a sudden someone gets let go, and like, man, now we need to find someone else to work. And I'm like, I'll work here. And then I start working at a cigar shop, and then all of a sudden a cigar company has an opening for a rep position. And I'm like, I would like to do that. And so I remember very vividly, you guys were talking about, sometimes there are people that, with their experience, or you talk to them, and, sometimes it could be negative if they don't want you to necessarily pursue that. I was driving to an interview it was my first interview to get, to be a cigar rep. And I was driving to Chicago, and as I'm driving, I was on I-65 in Indiana, and my dad called me. And he's like, hey, what are you doing? I'm like, well, I'm driving to Chicago for an interview. Oh, is that the cigar job? I'm like, yeah. He goes, well, I hope the interview goes well, but not too well. because at the time,
that's such a dad thing to say.
it is. Well,
I love
at
that.
at the time, I was working for a company that lately has been in the news for some of the stuff that they've done because of coronavirus. I was working for a company
In a good way, by the way.
in a good way. I used to work for Battelle. They're the one that just got that contract to sanitize N95 masks. They're headquartered right here in Columbus, Ohio.
Oh, wow.
So I used to work for them for a little over 7 years doing toxicology and pharmacology research. And but I hated the job. After a while, I just hated the job. And I was more passionate about cigars, which was my second job. I was more passionate about that than I was my primary job. So when an opportunity for a job in my passion came about, I that's what I wanted. And it was hard for my dad to understand that, because my dad was one of those guys, because he worked at UPS. That was one of those, if you get a job working for this company, you stay there until you retire.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Until you die.
Well, or that. So
It's a generation.
So the idea of me leaving that career for a career that I actually had a passion about, that was not something that necessarily resonated with my father. So now, thankfully, plus and minus, thankfully I did get that job, and I got the experience to have a job in my passion. It didn't work out as long as I wanted to, but I still got to do that, and I'm still in the industry. So I started out being a cigar smoker. I still work in the cigar industry. I work at the Tinderbox. I work with Steve. I work, when the shop's open, I'm there 5 nights a week. Like I said, putting in almost 30 hours a week, but that's because I love it. And that seems like less work than my normal job because I enjoy it so much. So cigars was a hobby, became a lifestyle. Before the podcast, like I had a handful of bottles of whiskey in my cabinet. I didn't drink a whole lot. I drank more on special occasions. And then Steve and Jake start a podcast out of their garage, and I'm listening. And next thing you know, a year ago, like I'm standing in line waiting for bottle picks at 7 o'clock in the morning.
7?
Well, because they open at 9, so I'm getting there at 7 o'clock to be the fourth person in
Ohio.
line.
That's Ohio.
Yeah, that's Ohio for you.
That's when you need friends in the right spots.
Yeah, so so I'd start waiting in line for state barrel picks, or then my hobby of running soundboard at a church for a decade. All of a sudden, the podcast needs to upgrade their stuff, and they go to, hey, we need a soundboard. We're going to have individual mics. I'm like, well, shit, I listen to the podcast. I'm friends with you guys, and I have experience running a soundboard. I'll do that for you. So then next thing you know, on Wednesday nights, I'm driving all the way across town just to be in Steve's garage. So that way I can run a soundboard for the podcast. And then things happen. And the next thing you know, like I'm helping Steve out with the podcast and doing more stuff than just running a soundboard. Because I'm one of those that when I find something I enjoy, because I tend to have an addictive personality, I go full bore into it. So when I used to still live at home, right after I graduated college, I had some friends that played paintball. I went out, and in the course of 2-3 weeks, I spent $600 on paintball gear, and all in. And I spent $600 on paintball gear, and my stepdad's like, well, since you can spend $600 on paintball gear, now you can start helping out with bills around the house. I'm like, well, shit, that didn't turn out how I thought it would.
Fair statement. And once again, a perfect dad statement.
Yeah.
it was. Yeah. But no, so, I mean, when you're talking about balance, like for me, most people would sit there and look at, you're working 70 hours a week, like how, and your only day off is Sunday afternoons. Like, how do you have any balance? I'm like, well, Sunday afternoon, that's my balance. That's when I get into my balance. Like, because if I just sit there every single night and I'm just sitting at home, I have nothing to do. I feel like I'm not accomplishing anything whatsoever. I'm not useful just sitting at home. So when I'm doing my day job, I'm useful. When I'm working at the cigar shop, because I tend to look at more of a big pic. Thanks, Steve. Steve's like, maybe.
Useful is a strong word, but
yeah, that's my. Then he gets him to buy stuff.
Yeah, that's my boss for you right there.
Easy.
But no, like I tend to look at things more of the big picture. So that's why I don't take a whole lot of at my job. In my team, I'm the most tenured person at my job.
Yeah.
And because of that, I have a harder time taking time off because I cover more responsibility than some of the other people on my team. And for me to take time off, that transfers that responsibility onto other people. And I have a sense of pride with doing the job that I do, but because I know it's so intensive, I don't want other people necessarily to have to experience that. I can handle it, but I don't want to push that responsibility onto other people. So that's why I have a hard time with my day job taking time off. There was one year I took less than 2 weeks off from work, but one of my coworkers took 7 weeks off. Like she just didn't care. But that's
I'm your coworker.
Yeah, there you go. But
that's me.
Alaina visited 18 countries in that moment.
But that's not because that's not anything necessarily negative towards that other person. It's I take pride in what I do. I take pride at being the best on my team, and I there are people that rely on me to do a good job. And I don't necessarily want to push that additional response because all the people on my team have their own responsibilities. And now I have to push, like with Steve knows with current events, for the next few days, I have to push my responsibilities onto the rest of my team. Like I hate that I have to do that, but it's something that I have to do. And I know they'll get through it. They'll be just fine. The people that depend on me will be just fine. But it's still hard for me to do that just because of the way I am. I'm not doing what I'm good at.
That's nice. All right, we're getting to the point here. Closing remarks. I don't know if Alaina or Abby have listened all the way through a long Bourbon and BS podcast, but we get to the closing remarks. So, part 2, part 1, again, going around the circle, just like we did with the reviews of the cigar and the whiskey and the pairing. I'm not saying rate this conversation. I'm saying, what are your closing remarks to all the listeners out there? And I want to plug you guys one more time. Bourbon and Blondes, it's available on all the iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, I assume. I don't know what you guys are using to upload the audio, but now you guys are transitioning a little bit like we did to more live stuff and doing both. But check them out, Bourbon and Blondes. It's a great podcast, not quite as long as ours, so it's a little easier listening, I think. But they have a great conversation, talk about bourbon, they talk about life, they talk about a lot of things, and it's a great podcast. And guys, I appreciate you being a part of it. So I'll leave it up to you. Who wants to go first on closing remarks as we round out part 2?
I'll go.
Staring down.
This is what we edit out of our podcast.
Yeah, when you go live, just a fair warning, there's no editing.
That's fine. We're funnier this way. Closing remarks. You guys are great. I have a lot to learn about cigars. Old Ezra 7 is great, and balance is not a thing. That's all I got.
Balance is not a thing. Okay. Strong. That's a strong statement.
Well, I mean, you just heard Nate's story. He's like, he's got a lot going on, and he, a little bit of Sunday afternoon.
Balance is different to each person.
Yes.
How about that?
I'll take Nate's words. Balance is different to each person.
You said it perfectly, Nate. Like, some people need to take the 7-week vacation, like myself with my corporate job, because I have zeros, maybe a small percentage, but zero for this conversation. Zero satisfaction out of doing it. It is when you have passion in it and you want to show up and be there, it's like, I'll be there 7 days a week because this is what I love to do. So 100 out of 10 for this conversation. Is that
don't rate it, but all right, I'll take it.
No, it's
100 being the highest, right? Or is that?
Yeah, give or take.
All right. I'll clarify there.
Well, she said 100 out of 10, so that's 10 times.
No, this is so good. Like, talking to you guys and just learning just everybody's situation is different. So being able to enjoy a conversation, whether it's over bourbon, over water, it doesn't really matter, but just learning more about you guys. Even, I mean, Abby, I talk to all the time, but every single conversation and podcast, I still learn a little bit more about her as well. And that's the beauty of, I've kind of learned during this like quarantine pandemic that, how to communicate with people differently and learning more about I've been more like focused in on what people are saying because I don't have all the outside distractions going on at the same time. And life seems to be a bit slower. So I've been really appreciating this time. So, I mean, I love talking to you guys, and this has been awesome. I really enjoyed the last half. If I was going to rate part 1, part 2, I like talking about the technical side, but I way more like talking about personal feelings and like all the fuzzy stuff way more. But that's just
that's what makes this last as long as it does, and we do a little different. It's not your typical. We always said it. It's not your typical, whiskey or cigar podcast. It's more of once you get past, you sit down, smoke a cigar, you ask the basics: what are you smoking? What are you drinking? All that stuff, and then all of a sudden at the as the night goes on, you actually start talking about life, and that's how the framework worked.
Well, that's what happens in a cigar shop.
Happens in a cigar shop as well. Nate, closing remarks.
So when you're talking about hobby or lifestyle, sometimes a hobby can be just that. It can just be something you do to take your mind off of what you do throughout the rest of the week, whatever your 8 to 5 type job is, or sometimes it could be a lifestyle. Sometimes it can be both. For me, my lifestyle is what I do throughout the week, my normal job. That's what I do. That's my main paycheck. That's my career right now. Like that, when people ask me, oh, what do you do? That's what I talk about. If they sit there and say, well, what do you do, for fun? I also work at a cigar shop. I spend 27 to 30 hours a week working at a cigar shop. Like, wait, you work 70 hours a week? I'm like, yeah, but when I'm doing that job, like, because that's also my hobby, it doesn't feel like work. Yes, It's taking time away from home. It's taken away from my personal life. When people sit there and say, hey, I want to hang out. When's a good night for you? How's Sunday look? That's the only time I got. Sunday. What are you doing on Sunday? That if you want to do something, if you want to hang out with me, Sunday's typically the only day I have when it's not coronavirus season. I would also tell people, like, don't think that your hobby can't become a lifestyle. Sometimes those hobbies can develop into a passion. I have a cousin that lives down in Kentucky. That's where our family originally is from, and his full-time job is he actually does fishing charters. He didn't sit there and grow up thinking, oh, I'm going to own a company doing fishing charters on Lake Erie or all these other lakes within the Midwest. He just grew up fishing with his dad at the local strip mine pond. Like, that was it. But he had a passion for doing that, and the opportunity came about to make that passion his career. It's, you know, if this podcast ever gets to the point where it's a full-time gig, we have the sponsors to make it a full-time gig. Like, that's something that definitely Steve's going to have to look at, since, you know, Steve is right now the mastermind behind the Bourbon and BS podcast. That doesn't mean he's necessarily going to quit being the manager at the Tinderbox. It's just going to be an opportunity to where his passion is a secondary career as well. You know, it's something on top of what he's doing, but because he loves doing what he's doing, yes, it's work. Don't get me wrong. I hate when people say, if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. I hate that statement.
I absolutely, and we had someone actually say that, and I hate that statement behind that, by the way.
I hate that statement because
why do you hate that statement?
Well, like,
there's always an element of work.
Well, there absolutely. Thank you, Abby. Like, when I was a cigar rep,
you put words in Abby, she took your words, and now vice versa.
It's a thing.
Yeah, thank you. Before I was a cigar rep, I thought being a cigar rep, that was my dream job. That's what I wanted to do. And then I got the opportunity to do that. Like, but I had a territory that was 7.5 states, including St. Louis, where you ladies are from. So I was averaging driving 5,000 miles a month. I had 200 accounts in my territory, and all I did was I would leave home Monday morning, 8 a.m., and I would get home sometime Friday night, like 10 p.m. That was my life. Don't sit there and tell me that being on the road, going to cigar shops, that wasn't work. No, it absolutely was work. Like, it was stressful. It was stressful on me. It was stressful on my marriage. It was stressful, you know, on every aspect of my life. It was still something I had a passion about. It was still something I enjoyed doing. You know, I'm not a cigar rep anymore. But I still work probably about the same number of hours when it's not on lockdown. You know, so whether it's 65, 70 hours a week, like, I'm still working the same. But even if I didn't have a second job, if I came home every night, you know, I was home at 5:30. Like, what am I doing from 5:30 until I go to bed? Like, am I really doing anything that's that productive that I couldn't do any other time of the week?
No,
like,
I get it.
Probably not. I mean, so there are hobbies, there are lifestyles. Sometimes you have to be open to a hobby becoming a lifestyle, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. And there's going to be other people that have an opinion. You still have to do what you feel passionate about. You know, I had people in my own family that were strong influences that obviously they were fine with me working in a cigar shop. They were fine with me working 2 jobs. They were not fine with me making cigars my full-time job.
There you go.
But it was still something I loved. It was a hobby that turned into a passion. Bourbon was a hobby that turned into, I wouldn't say it's a lifestyle at this point, but let's say, well, you know, when
it's important. It is.
When you're standing in line for bottle picks, or you're having your wife go stand in line for a bottle pick to get
that point,
to get a bottle signed by Stephen Beam, like, maybe a little bit more than a hobby at that point.
You're committed.
When you're running a soundboard one day a week to now you're actually running a soundboard for a podcast, even though it's still one day a week, when Steve and Jake, when Jake was still part of the podcast, like, I volunteered to run the soundboard for the podcast because I had done it for so long.
Yeah.
I wanted them to have the best product available. When I work at the cigar shop, the reason I don't take too many days off is because I want the cigar shop to succeed. The reason I don't take too many days off at my regular job is because I want my company to succeed. Like, that's just how I am. I'm not just thinking about me and my hobbies and my interests. I'm thinking about the bigger picture, because if the bigger picture is doing well, then I should be doing well as well.
Well, yeah, I agree. You know, again, my closing remarks, again, Bourbon and Blondes, you guys have been amazing. I've said it already on this podcast. You guys, if you are listeners to the Bourbon and BS podcast, check them out. It's absolutely a fantastic podcast. And I think that anyone that listened to part 1 or part 2 tonight, that they can absolutely get to know you guys very, very well. And there's a lot to be offered there as listeners about bourbon, about life. You guys do what we do. Now we're pushing our 2 hours turning into 3 hours that you guys do in 30 minutes. So I have to keep listening to your podcast so I can learn how to streamline this.
Alaina does it, so talk to her.
Let us know.
Yeah. If you can give me some outline notes, not very many.
Well, Steve, you were staying more around the 2 to 2.5 hour mark before the whole lockdown thing started.
I was. Now everyone wants to talk. No one's got nothing to do. So no, but my closing remarks, with all of this, I enjoy this. I think that I took a lot away from Alaina and Abby being on this, and Nate, as always, you've got great points, and our 2 guests, Bourbon and Blondes, so many good points. One of the things I like about this is that it's something that is very relevant. It's a hobby versus lifestyle. Don't give yourself too much credit.
Or do.
That's why I did the golf clap. I didn't do the full round of applause. I did the golf clap.
Thank you.
I look at it, and it's something that I think that Abby, I'll kind of focus on you a little bit, and also Alaina, you mentioned one of my mantras is focus, right? And one of the things when Abby was talking about balance, and she doesn't really believe in it, I think it's how I took it.
Right.
It's a struggle for everyone, and I feel like when you're looking at your day-to-day life, no matter what you do for a living, when you get hobbies, you get lifestyle, that line that you're walking, the consumption level of your waking hours, and even when you're dreaming about it, there's, like Nate was talking about, the cigar industry. There are times that you can, we had a listener say, if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. And that is a good saying as a goal, but it's always work. And I look at that the same way as with lifestyle, is that when you have a passion about something, I truly believe that you always are learning. You're a sponge. You have the drive. It comes more naturally to you when you're interested in it. And it doesn't seem like work, but there's a lot of work to be had there. And that's where you get better. That's where you learn. That's where you meet new people. We talked a lot about, just talking to people tonight. And I think that's the big thing, is you surround yourself with people that you trust and people that you have already in your life. But one of the greatest things about anything that you do, whether it be a passion, a job, a hobby, or a lifestyle, there's a big part of it that it's always about opening your mind and opening your ears, and just all of the senses that you have that you're learning constantly. That's the stimulus to yourself, and that's what gets you to the next level. That's what keeps you passionate about it, because as soon as something becomes stagnant, you're no longer interested. It's something that you look back at it. If you've closed off, it's something that you look with resentment. And I think that's where you lose yourself in that. So, Abby, you were talking about like the balance part of it. For me, that's a big part of it. And I talked about, with working out and fitness, that was something that I struggled with for a while. It's been a big part of my life. But when I got into the bourbon, the whiskey, the cigars, and everything else, and I was working in a different career, that's where I struggled, is how do I balance all of those things? Everything came crashing down years ago to a point that when now looking back, I really have learned a lot from myself. I've learned a lot from the people around me. I look to the people that are happy, that have happy relationships, that they may have a job that is still a job, that's still a career, but they're good at it, but they also have balanced it with their hobbies, that it's tough to, I've said it several times. It's tough to have that line that you walk, that most people look at things like a hobby, but you know them as in all the context of this conversation, you know them as your bourbon reference, your cigar reference. And then when you have that conversation, you know, Alaina, you talked about the 100 out of 10 on this second part. This is what a cigar shop is. This is the difference between a cigar shop most of the time. Now, if you're drinking, it's not quite that different, but from sitting around and sampling whiskeys, you talk about what you're sipping on, you talk about the hobby, you talk about the cigars, and you learn from each other. But the true impact when it becomes a lifestyle for me is when it hits other levels. The circles actually are expanding now. I always say this, where as we get older, your hobbies or your proximity growing up, who are your friends in high school? Your friends were people that were in the same clubs as you, the same neighborhoods as you. As you get older, that doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
And now it's like if you have families or if you move or whatever it is, Facebook helps, all these social media things help. But when you actually get down to it, the people that you actually have an identity with are the people that you have a similar lifestyle or hobby. And I think that when I was thinking about this topic, and I sent this to all three of you, that I was struggling with the topic tonight for part 2. But when it came down to it, this is what made sense to me. Because when I say hobby or lifestyle, anymore, it's very interchangeable.
Mm-hmm.
Because as soon as you put more of yourself behind making yourself happy and finding yourself in that and feeling more confident about what you find important to you, those are the reasons that when you have an interaction with someone else, whether it be about whiskey or cigars or whatever the hobby that turned into a lifestyle might be, this is part of your identity. And that's really where the value comes into place, because now all of a sudden you know yourself better. And when you know yourself better, not only do you feel better about yourself, but now you can be better for people that are in your social circle. Mm-hmm. Because now you're not just relying on those people for advice or for recentering. You've actually created a solid base for yourself on what you hold as your interests, your values, your strengths, that other people start learning from you. And we talked a lot about learning from other people, but Alaina and Abby, you guys run a podcast. People look to you for advice. Mm-hmm. They look to you for knowledge. And I feel very confident in saying that there's a big part of you guys that you're still learning. You're like, I don't know why people are listening. Am I right or wrong there?
Oh, you're right.
Oh, no, 100%. Yeah.
100% right. But when you actually commit yourself and you focus on making yourself better for other people and for yourself included, that's where the true value, and that's where everyone gets more from everyone, as long as you are constantly trying to learn from yourself, from other people. And we all really, really gain value from other people. And that's why I look at hobby or lifestyle anymore these days with everything else going on in this world. I truly believe that there is a very, very, I said it many times tonight, there's a very fine line, and it's about the matter of how much you commit yourself to that hobby that's now your lifestyle. It doesn't mean that you have to take over your whole life with a lifestyle, but if you're truly committed to it, there's a lot of happiness that comes from it. And I think that's what you guys do your podcast for. I think that's why we do this, because we all learn from each other. That's why we do it live. And I think that you guys will learn a lot from doing your podcast live, because if you open up your comments, there's going to be entirely a different level of conversations between the two of you guys with all the people that are listening after the fact. Now they're listening live, and you're just going to be looking at your feed, and you're like, oh my God, these people have something to say and they want to be a part of the conversation. That's the big part of it. It's all about community. It's about surrounding yourself with good people. So those are my closing remarks. And guys, ladies, I appreciate you joining us tonight.
Thanks for having us. It's been so fun.
It's been awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. I really appreciate it. And I do want to thank our sponsors again for those that are listening all the way to the end. We just had a uptick in listeners. Great. Tinderbox at Easton for the featured cigar, Sobremesa. Check it out. We do have, I'm going to throw it up there one more time. We have a Tinderbox at Easton. There's the Miami Cigar Company sampler, 30% off. If you guys get anything out of this podcast, listening to it, and you do smoke cigars, take advantage of this. Contact them, eastontinderbox@gmail.com. Also, Alternus USA, they believed in us from the very beginning, and they actually supported us. That made this thing happen, actually, long term, which we appreciate. Josh, Paul, everyone else that part of that company. Great cigars, major labels, and also BS Cigar Company, gold and silver are available. I raise a glass, patreon.com.
Don't forget Grand Cru.
What's that?
Yeah, the good old Grand Cru.
St. Louis. If you're in the St. Louis area, check out Grand Cru Cigar Lounge. That was a strong recommendation from Bourbon and Blondes, but check them out if you're in the St. Louis area. Raise a glass. Thank you very much, everyone, tuning in. Cheers. Happy Whiskey Wednesday. Enjoy your week.
Cheers.
Cheers.